Forgiveness is supposed to set us free, but what if I told you it could also be used to control you? Imagine someone forgiving you, not out of love, but to silence your pain, make themselves look superior, or even trap you in emotional debt. This is what it means to weaponize forgiveness, and it's far more dangerous than most people realize. In today's video, I'll expose how manipulative people twist something sacred into a weapon, and how you can protect yourself from it. If you've ever felt guilty, silenced, or trapped in the name of forgiveness, this video is for you. So hit that subscribe button, like this video, and stay until the end, because what you learn today might just set you free. Weaponize forgiveness. Forgiveness is usually thought of as a powerful tool for healing. When someone apologizes and we truly forgive them, it allows both people to move forward, rebuild trust, and let go of lingering resentment. In its healthy form, forgiveness is an act of compassion. It recognizes human flaws, accepts accountability, and opens the door to genuine change. But not everyone uses forgiveness this way. In toxic or manipulative dynamics, forgiveness can be twisted into something harmful, something that no longer heals but instead controls. This is what it means to weaponize forgiveness. When forgiveness is weaponized, it stops being a gift of healing and becomes a strategy. For example, someone may forgive you very quickly, not because they are truly okay, but because it allows them to look superior. They appear calm, wise, and emotionally evolved, while you may still be hurting or struggling. If you continue to express your pain, they might accuse you of holding on to things or of being negative, when in reality, you are simply processing what happened. Their quick forgiveness is not about peace. It's about silencing you and making themselves look like the better person. Another way forgiveness is weaponized is through guilt. Imagine someone who repeatedly brings up how forgiving they were in the past. They might say things like, "Remember when I let that go for you?" or "I could have stayed mad, but I chose to forgive you." At first, this might sound generous, but over time it becomes a tool to make you feel indebted to them. You start to feel like you owe them your compliance, your silence, or your unquestioning loyalty. Because, after all, they were so kind to forgive you. What looks like generosity is really a form of emotional debt. Weaponized forgiveness also creates a subtle form of gaslighting, because forgiveness is socially viewed as the right. Time distortion. Time distortion is one of the most subtle yet powerful tools used in manipulation. At its core, it's about twisting the perception of time in order to weaken your memory, challenge your sense of reality, and undermine your ability to stand firmly in your truth. When someone uses time distortion against you, they change the way past events are remembered by exaggerating, minimizing, or flat out denying when and how things actually happened. Over time, this tactic erodes your confidence in your own judgment and leaves you vulnerable to further control. One of the most common ways time distortion works is by minimizing how often something has happened. For example, imagine you bring up that a partner has been dismissive or cruel multiple times over the past month. Instead of acknowledging the pattern, they respond with something like, "Come on, that only happened once. You're making a big deal out of nothing." In that moment, they are rewriting the timeline, forcing you to question your memory of repeated events. You begin to wonder, am I exaggerating? Maybe it really did only happen once. Slowly, your own mind becomes an unreliable narrator, not because of your memory, but because of their manipulation. Another form of time distortion involves exaggeration. A manipulative person might say, "You always bring this up," or "We've been going through this forever," when in reality you may have only mentioned it a few times. By exaggerating the length or frequency of your complaints, they make you feel unreasonable and exhausting. The strategy is simple but effective. If they can convince you that you're repeating yourself endlessly, you may stop bringing up issues altogether, even when they truly matter. There's also the tactic of downplaying the importance of the past by insisting that too much time has passed. If you express pain over something that happened, recognizing time distortion requires slowing down and trusting your memory. Journaling can be a powerful tool because writing down what actually happened allows you to go back and check the facts when someone tries to twist them. Trusted friends or outside perspectives can also help ground you in reality when your sense of time and memory has been distorted. Most importantly, it's about noticing the patterns. When someone consistently tells you your memory is wrong, minimizes repeated behaviors, or dismisses your pain as too old, you may be dealing with time distortion. Ultimately, Time distortion is not about honest disagreements in memory. It's about control. It's a deliberate strategy to confuse, silence, and weaken you so that your experiences lose their weight and your truth feels unstable. The more it is used, the harder it becomes to separate what really happened from what the manipulator insists happened. By learning to spot this tactic, you protect yourself from losing your grip on reality and begin reclaiming your confidence in your own lived experiences. Deflection. Through humor, humor is one of the most disarming and universally accepted social tools we have. A well-timed joke can ease tension, make people feel comfortable, and even bring healing to difficult situations. But like many positive human qualities, humor can also be twisted into a weapon when it is used not to connect, but to deflect. Deflection through humor is a manipulation tactic in which someone uses jokes, sarcasm, or playful teasing to avoid responsibility, silence uncomfortable conversations, or shift the focus away from their harmful behavior. On the surface, it can look harmless, even charming, but underneath, it erodes trust and invalidates genuine feelings. Imagine you bring up something serious with a partner, like how they embarrassed you in front of friends. Instead of acknowledging your hurt, they laugh and say, "Oh, come on, don't be so sensitive, I was just joking." This is a classic example of humor as deflection. Instead of engaging with your feelings, they hide behind the shield of comedy. The moment you object, you become the problem, the one who can't take a joke. The issue shifts from their harmful behavior to your supposed lack of humor. This subtle reversal keeps them free of accountability while leaving you feeling guilty or overly sensitive. The tactic can also appear in group settings. A manipulator may make a cruel or cutting remark disguised as a joke in front of others. Everyone laughs because the delivery sounds funny, but you feel the sting of humiliation. If you speak up, they dismiss your pain with lines like, "Relax, it was just banter," or "Don't ruin the mood." The group dynamic now pressures you to stay quiet because objecting would make you look like the one spoiling the fun. This creates isolation and ensures that their behavior goes unchecked while you're left questioning your own emotional responses. Deflection. Psychologically, this tactic creates a state of cognitive dissonance. You feel hurt, but at the same time, everyone is laughing and the manipulator insists it was funny. Your brain struggles to reconcile your pain with the social cues around you. This confusion makes it harder to trust your own instincts. You might even laugh along at your own expense, just to keep the peace, which deepens the cycle of self-betrayal. Recognizing deflection through humor requires paying attention to patterns. Healthy humor builds connection, but toxic humor shuts down conversations. If you notice that every attempt at a serious discussion ends with you being laughed at, dismissed, or made to feel too sensitive, that's not comedy. It's control. True humor has room for respect, empathy, and listening. Deflective humor, on the other hand, is used as a shield, a weapon, and sometimes a dagger disguised as a smile. The long-term damage of this tactic is serious. It erodes communication, breeds resentment, and makes authentic vulnerability nearly impossible. It keeps relationships locked in shallow territory where nothing uncomfortable can ever be addressed. Worse, it can make you feel like you're the problem simply for wanting respect. That is why it's so important to identify deflection through humor for what it is. Not harmless fun, but a deliberate way of dodging responsibility and invalidating your truth. Ambient abuse. When people think of abuse, they often imagine direct actions, yelling, insults, manipulation that can be pointed to clearly. But some of the most damaging forms of abuse are not loud or obvious at all. Ambient abuse is a subtle, ever-present form of emotional control that surrounds a person like the air they breathe. It's not one single cruel comment or action. It's the ongoing atmosphere created by the abuser, one that keeps the victim in a constant state of unease, confusion, and self-doubt. The abuse is in the background noise of the relationship, making it very hard to detect, let alone confront. Think of it like living in a house where the temperature is always just slightly uncomfortable, not hot enough to escape, but cold enough to never truly feel safe. Ambient abuse works the same way. It's not always obvious cruelty, but a steady drip of tension, disapproval, and emotional unpredictability. One day they're warm and supportive. The next day they're distant, sarcastic, or dismissive for no clear reason. You can't put your finger on a single event that proves abuse, yet the overall emotional climate leaves you exhausted and insecure. One of the most common elements of ambient abuse is the creation of a hostile emotional environment without direct confrontation. For example, An abuser might roll their eyes at nearly everything you say, sigh heavily whenever you speak, or give you long, silent treatments without explanation. None of these behaviors on their own may seem abusive, but combined, they create an environment where you constantly feel wrong, small, or like a burden. You start questioning whether you're truly unlikable or broken, when in reality it's the atmosphere they've manufactured. Another form of ambient abuse involves subtle undermining. Instead of directly insulting you, the abuser might make harmless comments in passing. Are you Sue? The cruel genius of ambient abuse is that it is nearly invisible. It doesn't explode. It seeps. It lingers in the pauses, in the tones, in the atmosphere that surrounds you day after day. And because it's so hard to identify, it often lasts far longer than more obvious forms of abuse. Recognizing ambient abuse requires tuning into patterns and listening to your body. Do you feel constantly tense, anxious, or drained around someone even though you can't point to one specific thing they've done? Do you find yourself silencing your own feelings because you don't want to deal with it? If so, you might be experiencing ambient abuse. The key is not to wait for a big, dramatic event to validate your experience. The abuse is in the air, and just because it's subtle doesn't make it any less real or any less damaging. Reverse victimhood. Reverse victimhood is one of the most deceptive and emotionally draining tactics in the manipulator's toolkit. At its core, it's about flipping the roles in a conflict. Instead of acknowledging the harm they've caused, the manipulator paints themselves as the one who has been wronged. This shift not only avoids accountability, but also places the true victim in the uncomfortable position of defending themselves, often against accusations that are exaggerated, distorted, or entirely fabricated. Over time, this reversal can make you feel like you are constantly on trial, while the real abuser walks away appearing blameless, or even pitiful. To understand reverse victimhood, imagine you calmly bring up to a friend that they broke your trust by sharing something private. Instead of apologizing, they lash out and say, "Do you know how hard it is for me when you accuse me of things? You're making me feel like a terrible person." Suddenly, the focus is no longer on the betrayal of your trust. It's on their hurt feelings. In this moment, the roles flip. You, the one who was wronged, are now pushed into defending why you spoke up, while they, the one who caused the harm, demand sympathy. This tactic works so effectively because it taps into empathy. Most people don't want to cause pain to others, and manipulators exploit that natural compassion. By presenting themselves as fragile, misunderstood, or attacked, they redirect the emotional energy of the situation. Instead of holding them accountable, you may find yourself comforting them, reassuring them, or even apologizing for bringing up your pain in the first place. What began as an effort to stand up for yourself ends with you silenced and then protected. Reverse victimhood also often involves rewriting the story of events. A manipulator might take something they did wrong and spin it so that you are the aggressor. Recognizing reverse victimhood requires noticing the consistent role flipping that happens in conflicts. If you find that every time you raise an issue, the conversation somehow ends with you apologizing and them walking away with sympathy, you may be caught in this cycle. Healthy conflict resolution involves both people being able to take responsibility where needed and listen to each other's pain. Reverse victimhood destroys that balance. It transforms accountability into accusation and empathy into manipulation. At its core, reverse victimhood is about control. It allows the manipulator to escape responsibility while securing compassion and protection from others. By learning to spot this tactic, you begin to reclaim your right to express your pain without carrying theirs as well. You learn that being the real victim doesn't make you cruel, and demanding accountability doesn't mean you lack empathy. It means you are choosing truth over manipulation. Dog whistling. Dog whistling is a subtle but powerful manipulation tactic where someone communicates a hidden message that only certain people will understand, while appearing innocent or harmless to everyone else. The term comes from actual dog whistles, which emit sounds only dogs can hear. In human interaction, dog whistling works the same way. The manipulator delivers coded words, gestures, or jokes that carry a double meaning. On the surface, it may seem like a casual comment or a harmless phrase, but underneath, it's a targeted attack, insult, or signal meant for specific people. The genius and cruelty of dog whistling lies in its plausible deniability. If you confront the manipulator, they can always deny their true intent. "It was just a joke," "You're reading too much into it," or "That's not what I meant." This puts you in a frustrating position where you know something toxic was said, but you can't prove it to others. As a result, dog whistling protects the abuser while leaving the victim feeling isolated, unheard, and gaslit. Let's break it down with an example. Imagine being at a family dinner where someone has always mocked you for your career choice. Instead of saying something directly insulting, they smile and remark, "Well, some of us don't care about money, and that's admirable, I guess." To others, it sounds like a neutral or even positive statement, but you know it's a jab at you. When you try to point it out, they deny it and act shocked that you would assume bad intent. Now you look like the one who's overreacting, while they sit comfortably in the role of innocence. Dog whistling often appears in workplace politics too. A manager might say during a meeting, "We all know who has trouble meeting deadlines, don't we?" without naming anyone. Everyone chuckles, but the person being targeted feels singled out and humiliated. If they complain, the emstschurms. An actor can deny it was about them or claim it was a harmless general comment. The power of this tactic is that the message lands exactly where it was meant to, while outsiders see nothing wrong. Psychologically, dog whistling is devastating because it attacks you while making you appear irrational if you defend yourself. Over time, victims start to feel trapped in silence. You may stop speaking up in fear of being labeled sensitive, paranoid, or dramatic. The manipulator counts on this, knowing they can chip away at your confidence with sly remarks while always staying a step ahead of exposure. In relationships, dog whistling often takes the form of inside jokes with a cruel edge. A partner may develop pet names or playful references that actually mask criticism. For example, calling you the slow one in public might sound affectionate, but you know it's rooted in their constant mocking of your pace or habits. When you express hurt, they laugh and say, "It's just our little joke, don't make it serious." What feels humiliating to you is painted as harmless fun to outsiders. This duality keeps you silenced and doubting your feelings. The danger of dog whistling is not only in the words themselves, but in the pattern they create. It's a long game, designed to undermine your sense of self while making you look unreasonable if you try to fight back. Every remark is a cut that doesn't bleed in public, but stings in private. Over time, the cumulative effect of these cuts can seriously damage your confidence and sense of belonging. One of the most harmful consequences of dog whistling is the isolation it creates. Since others don't hear what you hear, you feel alone in your perception. Friends, family, or coworkers might even side with the manipulator, believing you are too sensitive. This deepens the wound, making you doubt not just the manipulator, but your own judgment. The gaslighting effect is profound. The abuser looks innocent, while you carry the burden of proving something invisible. Recognizing dog whistling requires trusting your instincts. If you consistently feel hurt by comments that others dismiss as harmless, it's worth examining whether there's a hidden message being directed at you. Ask yourself, does this person have a history of making these remarks? Do they smile or glance at you after delivering them? Do you notice a pattern where you feel insulted, but others don't catch it? These are strong signs you're being targeted by dog whistling. Ultimately, dog whistling is a tactic of cowardice. It allows the manipulator to throw stones while hiding their hands, to insult without accountability, and to control narratives while making you doubt your own truth. Its power lies in silence and denial, but once you name it for what it is, you strip away its disguise. Knowing the tactic exists gives you clarity. What feels personal is personal, even if others can't hear it. Covert sabotage. Not all sabotage is obvious. When we hear the word sabotage, we often imagine deliberate, visible acts of destruction. Someone cutting wires, ruining a project, or openly undermining another person's success. But in toxic dynamics, sabotage is far more subtle. Covert sabotage is the quiet, behind-the-scenes interference designed to hold you back, while the manipulator keeps their hands clean. It's invisible enough to deny, but damaging enough to keep you stuck, questioning yourself and doubting your abilities. Covert sabotage usually starts small. Maybe you're preparing for a big presentation at work, and your partner or coworker accidentally distracts you the night before, ensuring you're too tired to perform your best. Maybe you share your goals with someone, like applying for a new job or starting a health journey, and instead of encouraging you, they plant seeds of doubt. Are you sure you're cut out for that? Or, that seems like too much for you? On the surface, it sounds like concern, but the effect is corrosive. The more these little interruptions and discouragements pile up, the harder it becomes to reach your goals. One of the hallmarks of covert sabotage is plausible deniability. If you confront the person, they always have an excuse. They didn't mean to make you late. They just forgot to give you the message. They didn't try to discourage you. They were just being realistic. They didn't intend to interfere. They were only trying to help. The beauty of covert sabotage, from the manipulator's perspective, is that they can cause real damage while always appearing innocent or even supportive. In relationships, covert sabotage can be deeply painful because it comes from someone who is supposed to be on your side. A partner may consistently interrupt your routines, mock your ambitions, or forget to do the small things that would make your life easier. Over time, these small acts don't feel accidental. They feel like patterns. Every time you try to grow, achieve, or move forward, something happens that drags you back down. Instead of lifting you up, the person closest to you seems to keep you stuck exactly where they want you. This kind of sabotage is especially dangerous because it chips away at your confidence. For instance, if you're working toward a fitness goal and your partner keeps bringing home unhealthy food as a treat, it doesn't look like sabotage, it looks like love. But the repeated disruption of your discipline slowly convinces you that maybe you just don't have what it takes. If you're pursuing a career move and a friend keeps reminding you of all the risks, it doesn't look like sabotage, it looks like concern. Yet the constant negativity weakens your motivation until you begin to abandon your own dreams. Psychologically, covert sabotage is a form of control. By undermining you quietly, the manipulator ensures you never grow beyond the level where they feel comfortable. They may fear being left behind if you succeed. They may resent the possibility of you gaining independence. Or they may simply thrive on the power of knowing they can quietly hold you back. Whatever the reason, the end result is the same. You remain smaller, weaker, or less confident than you could have been. Over time, the impact of covert sabotage can be devastating. Victims often blame themselves for their lack of progress, not realizing how much of their struggle has been engineered. You may feel like you're lazy, unmotivated, or incapable, when in reality, you've been quietly undermined by someone who never wanted you to thrive. This self-blame is the cruelest part of covert sabotage. It convinces you that the problem lies in you, not in the manipulation surrounding you. Recognizing covert sabotage requires looking for patterns. Do your setbacks always seem to happen in connection with the same person? Does someone close to you always have an innocent way of interfering with your progress? Do you leave interactions with them feeling drained, doubtful, or stuck? These are signs that what you're experiencing may not be coincidence at all. It may be deliberate sabotage masked as carelessness or concern. To protect yourself, you have to start trusting your instincts. If you notice that your growth is consistently interrupted in ways that don't feel accidental, you may need to set firmer boundaries or keep certain goals private. The sad truth is that not everyone who smiles at your success wants to see you succeed. Some will quietly chip away at your progress so you never rise too far above them. At its core, covert sabotage is betrayal dressed in subtlety. It doesn't leave obvious scars or explosions, but it quietly poisons the soil you're trying to grow in. And just because it's quiet doesn't mean it isn't destructive. In fact, its silence makes it more dangerous, because it can last for years before you finally realize that someone you trusted was never cheering for you. They were holding you back all along. False humility. Humility, when genuine, is a beautiful quality. It shows maturity, wisdom, and awareness that no one is above others. Truly humble people inspire respect because they balance confidence with modesty. But just like kindness, forgiveness, or humor, humility can be twisted into something deceptive. False humility is when someone pretends to be modest, selfless, or unassuming, not out of sincerity, but as a strategy to manipulate how others see them. On the surface, they seem humble, but underneath, it's a carefully constructed mask designed to win admiration, dodge responsibility, or control the narrative in their favor. At first glance, false humility can look harmless, even admirable. For example, someone might constantly downplay their talents. "Oh, I'm really not that good at this," even though they crave your reassurance. You rush to compliment them, and they act embarrassed, but secretly, they're feeding off the validation. Instead of celebrating accomplishments in an honest way, they position themselves as too humble, forcing others to provide the praise they're fishing for. This isn't humility. It's manipulation disguised as modesty. Another way false humility works is through self-deprecation as a shield. When caught in wrongdoing, the manipulator might say things like, "I'm the worst. I never do anything right. I don't even know why you put up with me." At first, this sounds like guilt or shame, but look closely. It's a tactic. By making themselves appear pitiful, they flip the emotional script. Instead of holding them accountable, you end up comforting them, reassuring them, and dropping the original issue. The false humility has shifted the spotlight away from their behavior and back onto their fragile self-image. In some cases, false humility shows up in generosity. A person might make a public show of giving, sacrificing, or helping others, while secretly making sure everyone notices. They insist, "It's nothing, I don't want any credit," but they position their actions in ways that guarantee they get credit anyway. The "I don't care about recognition" speech is part of the performance, because in truth, the recognition is exactly what they crave. Their modesty is staged, not authentic. Psychologically, false humility is dangerous because it creates confusion about a person's true motives. If someone consistently portrays themselves as small, selfless, or flawed, you may hesitate to confront them because it feels cruel to challenge someone who appears so humble. But this humility is not weakness. It's a mask that protects them from scrutiny. They hide behind modesty to disarm criticism and to keep control of how they are perceived. One of the deepest harms of false humility is that it invalidates genuine humility. If you are someone who values modesty, you may find yourself drawn to people who seem unassuming or selfless, only to later realize that their humility was a trap. By the time you notice the truth, you may already be emotionally invested in supporting them, praising them, or protecting their fragile-seeming ego. They have built a safety net where they are constantly lifted up by others while rarely taking true responsibility. Over time, relationships with people who use false humility can feel draining. You might notice that you are constantly reassuring them, defending them, or admiring them, while your own needs and accomplishments are minimized. It creates an imbalance where they always receive more emotional energy than they give. Worse, if you ever point out the manipulation, they can weaponize their false humility even further, saying things like, "Wow, I can't believe you'd think I'd do that. I'm not even worthy of that kind of power." The cycle deepens, and once again, they escape accountability. In professional settings, false humility can be particularly insidious. A coworker might act like they're unsure of their abilities, but strategically use that image to avoid responsibility for mistakes while still benefiting from praise when things go right. Leaders who practice false humility may publicly downplay their power, claiming they are just one of the team, while using their modesty to mask controlling or self-serving behavior. The disconnect between their words and actions creates a culture of distrust, but it's hard to call them out because their mask looks virtuous. The long-term effect of false humility on those around it is subtle but exhausting. You may feel guilty for ever being frustrated with them, because how could someone so humble be manipulative? You may find yourself constantly giving more than you get, because their modesty tricks you into overcompensating, and eventually, you may realize that their humility wasn't about making space for others at all. It was about drawing more attention and control to themselves. True humility doesn't need to announce itself. It's quiet, steady, and authentic. False humility, by contrast, always leaves a trail of neediness, manipulation, and imbalance. Recognizing the difference means paying attention not just to words, but to patterns. Do they truly act with selflessness, or do they fish for reassurance? Do they deflect accountability by making themselves the victim of their own flaws? Do they hide behind modesty as a way to control how others see them? If so, their humility may not be real. It may just be another mask. False humility is not just harmless modesty taken too far. It's a calculated tactic. It ensures the manipulator receives admiration, avoids responsibility, and keeps others emotionally hooked. And the danger lies in how convincing it looks. By seeing through the performance, you reclaim your ability to tell the difference between genuine modesty and manipulative disguise, micro-betrayals. When we think of betrayal, we often picture dramatic events, someone lying, cheating, or openly breaking trust in a way that's impossible to ignore. But betrayal doesn't always happen in explosive moments. Sometimes it happens in tiny, almost invisible ways that slowly corrode trust over time. These are called micro-betrayals, small acts of disloyalty, dishonesty, or disrespect that may seem insignificant on their own, but when repeated, they form cracks that weaken the entire foundation of a relationship. Micro-betrayals can be as simple as a dismissive remark, an unnecessary secret, or a broken promise. For example, a partner might repeatedly forget to mention that they had lunch with someone you have expressed concern about. A friend might tell small lies about being too busy, when in reality, they just didn't want to see you. A coworker might take credit for your ideas in subtle ways that go unnoticed by others. None of these moments alone may feel catastrophic, but over time, they create an emotional landscape where you no longer feel safe, respected, or valued. What makes micro-betrayals so dangerous is their subtlety. Because they're small, they're easy to dismiss. It's not a big deal, or maybe I'm just being dramatic. Manipulators count on this. They know that if they keep their betrayals just under the threshold of obviousness, you're less likely to confront them. And if you do, they can minimize it. You're overreacting, or it was just a little thing. This makes you doubt your instincts, teaching you to tolerate small breaches of trust until they pile up into something much bigger. Micro-betrayals often show up as patterns. A partner who constantly shares details of your private life with others, despite promising not to, may seem careless at first, but repeated over time, these small breaches of confidentiality show a lack of respect for your boundaries. A friend who makes constant jokes at your expense might seem playful, but the repeated digs reveal a deeper disregard for your feelings. The betrayal is in the repetition, in the message underneath. Your trust doesn't really matter. In relationships, micro-betrayals are often the precursors to larger betrayals. A person who gets away with small lies, broken promises, or subtle disloyalties becomes more emboldened to take bigger risks. For example, someone who constantly flirts in harmless ways may eventually cross more serious boundaries. Someone who lies about little things may eventually lie about big things. The small betrayals lay the groundwork, normalizing dishonesty and making it harder for you to recognize when a line has truly been crossed. Psychologically, the impact of micro-betrayals is heavy. Even though each instance feels minor, your nervous system registers the breach of trust. Over time, this builds into chronic stress, insecurity, and emotional fatigue. You may find yourself hypervigilant, always scanning for the next letdown. You might start questioning whether you're worth honesty and loyalty at all. In this way, micro-betrayals erode not just your trust in the relationship, but also your trust in yourself. One of the cruelest effects of micro-betrayals is how they chip away at intimacy. True closeness requires trust, but if you are constantly experiencing small breaches, you begin to pull back. You share less, invest less, and open your heart less. The relationship may continue on the surface, but underneath, a quiet withdrawal has begun. This emotional distancing can be just as painful as a single dramatic betrayal, because it represents the slow death of safety and connection. Micro-betrayals also thrive in environments where accountability is absent. If every time you try to address the issue, you're met with minimization or defensiveness, the pattern will only deepen. You end up carrying the weight of both the betrayal and the guilt for making it a big deal. This keeps you locked in silence, which allows the cycle to continue unchecked. Recognizing micro-betrayals requires paying attention to your emotional patterns. Do you often feel disappointed, unsettled, or disrespected in small ways? Do you find yourself brushing off things that hurt you because they seem too small to matter? Do you notice repeated behaviors that leave you questioning someone's loyalty or honesty? These are signs that micro-betrayals may be eroding your relationship. The truth is, betrayal doesn't have to be explosive to be real. Trust is built through consistent care, honesty, and respect. And it is destroyed in the same way, through consistent breaches, no matter how small. By identifying micro-betrayals, you give yourself permission to name what hurts, even if others would dismiss it as minor. Because in the end, it's not the size of the betrayal that matters most, it's the message it sends. Whether your trust is valued, or whether it's being quietly chipped away, one small crack at a time. Strategic silence. Silence can be powerful. In healthy relationships, silence is used to reflect, to calm down during conflict, or simply to share peaceful presence. But when silence is used strategically, it becomes something very different, a tool of manipulation and control. Strategic silence is the deliberate choice to withhold words, affection, or acknowledgement in order to punish, control, or destabilize another person. Unlike healthy pauses in communication, strategic silence creates confusion, anxiety, and power imbalance. One of the most common examples of strategic silence is the silent treatment. Instead of addressing an issue directly, the manipulator cuts off communication, ignoring calls, refusing eye contact, or acting as though the other person doesn't exist. To outsiders, it may seem like a small thing. They just need space. But for the person on the receiving end, it feels like being erased. This silence is not about reflection, it's about punishment. It leaves the victim feeling desperate to restore connection, even if it means apologizing for things they didn't do. See, strategic silence can also appear in subtler forms. For example, during a disagreement, one person might suddenly stop responding, leaving the other suspended in uncertainty. Hours, days, or even weeks might pass with no acknowledgement. By withholding communication, the manipulator avoids accountability while simultaneously creating pressure. The unspoken message is, "You will only get my attention back when you bend to my terms." This turns silence into a form of behavioral control, training the victim to fear disconnection. In relationships, silence can also be used to diminish intimacy. Imagine sharing something vulnerable with your partner, only to be met with cold silence instead of comfort. The absence of response becomes louder than words. It sends a message that your feelings do matter, or worse, that you're foolish for even expressing them. Over time, this discourages vulnerability and builds walls in the relationship. The partner using strategic silence maintains power, while the other learns to stay quiet, avoid conflict, and shrink emotionally. At work, strategic silence can show up as avoidance and exclusion. A toxic boss might ignore emails or forget to include you in important conversations, subtly signaling that you're unimportant. A manipulative coworker might refuse to acknowledge your contributions, pretending not to hear your ideas in meetings. In these contexts, silence is not passive. It's a loud declaration of dismissal and devaluation. It undermines your presence without leaving a direct statement that can be challenged. Psychologically, the impact of strategic silence is profound. Human beings are wired for connection. When communication is abruptly withdrawn, it triggers the same parts of the brain that process physical pain. That's why the silent treatment feels so unbearable. It's not just silence, it's emotional starvation. Victims often describe it as walking into a wall they can't get around. The more silence stretches on, the more desperate they become for resolution. Manipulators exploit this desperation, knowing that the victim will eventually break, apologize, or comply simply to end the discomfort. Another layer of harm comes from the uncertainty strategic silence creates. Because the silence is not explained, the victim fills in the blanks. What did I do wrong? Why are they mad? How can I fix this? This self-blame grows with each unanswered text, each cold shoulder, each night of being ignored. The manipulator doesn't need to accuse or argue. The silence itself does the work of breaking down the other person's sense of security. The long-term consequences of strategic silence include chronic anxiety, lowered self-esteem, and emotional dependence. Victims often internalize the belief that conflict is dangerous because it might lead to silence, so they stop bringing up concerns altogether. They may also develop a pattern of over-apologizing, over-explaining, or over-giving in order to avoid disconnection. In this way, silence becomes a leash, one that doesn't need to be pulled often to keep the victim in line. Recognizing strategic silence requires distinguishing between healthy space and manipulative withdrawal. Healthy silence is explained, "I need some time to cool off, I'll talk to you later," temporary, and followed by resolution. Strategic silence is unexplained, prolonged, and leaves the victim feeling punished or erased. If silence consistently feels like a weapon instead of a pause, you are likely dealing with manipulation. The danger of strategic silence lies in its invisibility. Because nothing is said, it's hard to call it abuse. Outsiders may not understand, and even victims may minimize it. It's just a little distance. But silence can be as loud as shouting when it's used with intent. It shapes behavior, enforces compliance, and controls emotions without a single word spoken. True intimacy requires communication, even when it's uncomfortable. Strategic silence destroys intimacy by turning the absence of words into a form of dominance. The manipulator holds the power by withholding the very connection you crave. Naming it for what it is breaks the illusion. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes it's punishment. Future faking is one of the most deceptive and emotionally exhausting manipulation tactics. At its core, it's about making promises for the future with no real intention of keeping them. The manipulator paints vivid pictures of what life will look like someday in order to secure your trust, buy your patience, or keep you emotionally invested in the relationship. But those promises are rarely delivered. Instead, they dangle just out of reach like a carrot on a stick, keeping you chasing an illusion that never arrives. At first, future faking feels intoxicating. The manipulator may talk about moving in together, getting married, building a family, or starting a business with you. They describe the future in rich detail, how they'll support you, how life will be better, how everything you dream of is right around the corner. You feel seen, valued, and chosen. It feels like commitment. But slowly, as time passes, the promises remain words and never turn into actions. Every time you ask about progress, they have excuses. The timing isn't right. I just need to figure some things out. Or, let's not rush it. I want it to be perfect. Months or even years go by, and the future they promised never materializes. Future faking is so effective because it taps into hope. Human beings are wired to pursue a better tomorrow, especially when love, security, or security is on the line. Manipulators exploit that hope, stringing you along with visions of what could be, while giving little in the present. Instead of noticing what they are actually doing, or failing to do, you stay focused on what they say is coming. Their words become more important than their actions. In romantic relationships, future faking often shows up as promises of commitment. A partner may constantly talk about marriage, children, or forever, but consistently avoid taking practical steps. They may even use these promises as a way to patch up conflicts. After a fight, they might suddenly talk about moving in together or planning a vacation. You feel reassured and hopeful, so you let the conflict go. But nothing changes. The promise was never about building a real future. It was about calming you down in the moment. Future faking is not limited to romance. In friendships, a manipulative person might keep saying, "We'll definitely plan that trip," or "I'll help you with that project soon," but they never follow through. At work, a toxic boss might dangle promotions, raises, or exciting opportunities as a way to keep employees loyal, even though they have no intention of delivering. The employee stays motivated by the promise of growth, only to realize later that the future was a mirage designed to keep them in place. The psychological impact of future faking is profound. Over time, you begin to feel stuck in limbo, caught between the hope of what could be and the reality of what isn't. You may rationalize their lack of action, telling yourself to be patient or give it time because the promises sound so convincing. But deep down, a part of you senses the disconnect. That tension creates anxiety, insecurity, and a painful cycle of waiting. Worse, when you eventually question the manipulator, they often flip the script. They accuse you of being impatient, ungrateful, or unwilling to trust them. They might even make new promises to distract you from the broken ones. This keeps the cycle alive. Hope, delay, disappointment, new hope, new delay. It's an emotional roller coaster that drains your energy while benefiting them. The cruelty of future faking lies in how it hijacks your dreams. Instead of pursuing goals on your own or seeking out relationships and opportunities that are real, you invest in their promises. You rearrange your life around a future that never comes. By the time you realize the truth, you may have wasted years waiting, hoping, and believing in a person who never intended to follow through. Recognizing future faking requires looking at actions over words. Do their promises consistently remain in the future, with no concrete steps in the present? Do conflicts get smoothed over with grand visions rather than real changes? Do you notice a pattern of waiting for things that never happen? These are red flags that the future being promised is not real. It's bait. Healthy relationships and workplaces don't require constant promises of someday. They show commitment in the present through action, consistency, and follow-through. Future faking strips you of that present reality, trapping you in endless hope. But once you see the pattern, you can reclaim your power by demanding action instead of words. If the future they promise never shows up, it's not because you're too impatient. It's because they never intended to deliver it in the first place. Gaslighting by proxy. Gaslighting is already one of the most insidious forms of psychological manipulation. It makes you doubt your memory, perception, and even your sanity. But when gaslighting is done by proxy, it takes the tactic to a far more sophisticated and destructive level. Gaslighting by proxy is when the manipulator enlists other people, friends, family, co-workers, or even strangers, to reinforce their false version of reality. Instead of you battling just one person's distortions, you find yourself surrounded by multiple voices insisting that your perception is wrong. This magnifies the confusion, isolates you, and makes the manipulator's lies feel even more convincing. Imagine you've been arguing with your partner because they constantly belittle you in public. Instead of acknowledging it, they tell your mutual friends, "She's always exaggerating, she can't take a joke." Later, when you confide in those same friends about how hurt you feel, they respond with, "Yeah, but you do get offended easily. He's just joking." Suddenly, it's not just your partner telling you you're wrong, it's the group around you, echoing his narrative. This is gaslighting by proxy. The manipulator has successfully recruited others to reinforce the distortion, leaving you even more isolated and doubting yourself. The power of this tactic lies in credibility. When one person says something, you can question it, but when multiple people seem to agree, it feels harder to deny. Manipulators know this. By planting seeds of misinformation in others, they build a network of unwitting allies who help them discredit you. Sometimes these allies don't even realize they're being used. Other times, they know exactly what they're doing, either out of loyalty to the manipulator or fear of crossing them. In both cases, the result is the same. You feel ganged up on, outnumbered, and powerless. Gaslighting by proxy can also happen in professional environments. Imagine a toxic boss who mistreats you, but tells other managers, "She's just too sensitive. She always takes things the wrong way." When you finally bring your concerns to HR or leadership, you're met with skepticism because the narrative has already been framed against you. Your experiences are dismissed, not because they lack truth, but because others have been primed to doubt you. This systemic reinforcement makes it almost impossible to speak up without being labeled the problem. In families, gaslighting by proxy can be even more devastating. A manipulative parent might pit siblings against one another, telling them, "Your sister always blows things out of proportion," or "Your brother is just trying to make me look bad." Over time, family members begin to echo these claims, leaving the targeted child feeling like no one believes them. The manipulator doesn't need to defend themselves directly. Others do it for them. This creates a toxic environment where the victim feels utterly alone, unable to rely on the very people who should be their support system. The psychological impact of gaslighting by proxy is extreme. Ordinary gaslighting already makes you question yourself. But when multiple voices reinforce the distortion, your sense of reality can completely unravel. You begin to wonder, if everyone else sees it differently, maybe I really am the problem. This self-doubt erodes confidence, damages self-esteem, and can even lead to anxiety, depression, or withdrawal. Another cruel aspect of gaslighting by proxy is how it isolates you. When friends, co-workers, or family members are convinced of the manipulator's version of events, you lose your support network. Reaching out for help often backfires because the people you turn to may respond with disbelief, minimization, or even accusations. You're left feeling as though no one is on your side, which makes you even more dependent on the manipulator for validation or stability. Gaslighting by proxy also allows the manipulator to maintain a clean image. To outsiders, they appear reasonable, charming, and believable because they've carefully curated the story that others repeat. Meanwhile, you are cast as unstable, overly emotional, or dishonest. The contrast between their reputation and your lived reality deepens the manipulation. The more good they look, the more bad you feel. Recognizing gaslighting by proxy requires noticing the patterns. Do people around you repeat the same dismissive lines the manipulator uses? Do you feel like others already have a negative opinion of you before you even speak? Do your attempts to explain your side consistently backfire? These are signs that someone has been influencing the narrative behind your back. Defending yourself against gaslighting by proxy can be incredibly difficult because it often involves entire groups or systems. The most important step is to anchor yourself in your own reality. Keeping written records, journaling, or confiding in a trusted outsider who hasn't been influenced can help preserve your clarity. Over time, you may also need to distance yourself from those who have been recruited into the manipulator's web, even if it's painful. At its core, gaslighting by proxy is about power. The manipulator knows that if they can control the narrative, they can control how you and everyone else sees reality. By surrounding you with their version of events, they leave you no space to stand in your truth. But once you see the tactic for what it is, you reclaim the ability to say, "No matter how many voices echo this lie, I know what I lived. I know what is true." Narcissistic ghosting. Ghosting has become a familiar term in modern relationships, especially in the context of dating. It refers to when someone suddenly disappears, cutting off communication without warning, explanation, or closure. But when ghosting is done by someone with narcissistic traits, it takes on a far more calculated and damaging form. Narcissistic ghosting is not simply avoidance, it's a power play. It's designed to confuse you, destabilize you, and remind you that they control when and how the connection exists. At its core, narcissistic ghosting is about abandonment as punishment. The narcissist disappears right when you expect support, consistency, or intimacy. Maybe everything seemed fine. You were texting daily, making plans, or even discussing the future, and then, suddenly, silence. Calls go unanswered, texts are ignored, social media activity disappears. You're left spinning, wondering what went wrong. Did you say something? Did you do something? The silence creates a void, and in that void grows self-doubt, insecurity, and desperation. Unlike ordinary ghosting, which may come from immaturity or conflict avoidance, narcissistic ghosting is often intentional. It usually happens at moments when you've expressed needs, questioned their behavior, or tried to establish boundaries. Instead of engaging with you, the narcissist withdraws completely, using silence as both punishment and control. They know that their absence will consume your thoughts. They know that you'll replay every detail, blaming yourself for their disappearance. For them, the silence is not absence, it's presence. It's the loudest statement they can make without saying a word. The cruelty of narcissistic ghosting lies in its cycle. Many narcissists don't ghost forever. They resurface when it suits them. After days, weeks, or even months of silence, they suddenly reappear with a casual message. "Hey, how have you been?" Or, "I was just busy, nothing personal." To you, the time apart felt like an eternity of confusion and pain. To them, it was a calculated reset. Their return floods you with relief, which makes you more forgiving and more willing to accept their excuses. The ghosting wasn't random, it was training. It conditions you to tolerate abandonment in exchange for scraps of reconnection. In romantic relationships, this cycle can be devastating. Each disappearance leaves you more anxious and less secure, while each return feels like a reunion worth clinging to. You start lowering your standards, grateful for any attention they give, even if it is inconsistent or manipulative. Over time, this creates a trauma bond. The pain of absence makes the moments of connection feel even more addictive. The narcissist thrives on this dynamic because it cements their control. Narcissistic ghosting doesn't only happen in dating. It shows up in friendships, families, and workplaces too. A friend may vanish whenever you need support, only to reappear when it benefits them. A narcissistic parent may withdraw affection or contact as punishment, teaching their child that love is conditional and unstable. In professional settings, a narcissistic boss may ghost you by ignoring your questions or excluding you from communication, only to later accuse you of incompetence. In all contexts, the silence is weaponized. It's a way to remind you that they control the terms of engagement. Psychologically, the impact of narcissistic ghosting is enormous. Human beings crave consistency and closure in relationships. When someone repeatedly disappears without explanation, it activates deep feelings of abandonment and rejection. You may find yourself obsessing over what went wrong, replaying conversations, or inventing excuses on their behalf. Over time, this erodes self-esteem, creating the belief that you are unworthy of stable love or attention. Another layer of damage comes from the unpredictability. Because you never know when they will vanish, you live in a state of constant anxiety. You may stop expressing needs or setting boundaries, fearing that doing so will trigger another disappearance. This self-silencing keeps you trapped in the relationship, giving the narcissist even more control. You adjust to their absence instead of demanding their presence. The manipulator also benefits socially from ghosting. To outsiders, they can frame the disappearance however they like. I just needed space. They were too needy. Or, I got busy. Because ghosting leaves no clear evidence, you are left struggling to explain the pain to others, who may dismiss it as normal or minor. This lack of validation deepens the isolation, making you feel even more invisible. Recognizing narcissistic ghosting requires looking beyond the silence itself. It's not just that they disappear, it's when and why. Does it happen right after you express concerns or assert yourself? Do they vanish during moments of vulnerability, only to reappear when you've calmed down? Do they repeat the cycle of disappearance and return, keeping you off balance? If so, it's not just avoidance, it's manipulation. Healthy relationships allow for space, but that space is explained, respectful, and consistent. Narcissistic ghosting offers no such clarity. It thrives on confusion, on leaving you guessing, on making you chase after someone who withholds connection as a form of dominance. The silence is the message. I control this relationship, and you don't. The truth is, no one deserves to be left in limbo as a form of punishment. Love, friendship, and respect require communication, even in conflict. Narcissistic ghosting replaces communication with abandonment, healing with confusion, and intimacy with control. Once you see it for what it is, you can stop blaming yourself for someone else's silence and start reclaiming your power. Because closure doesn't come from the person who ghosted you. It comes from recognizing the pattern and choosing not to chase after shadows. Context shifting. Context shifting is a slippery and highly manipulative tactic where someone changes the frame of references in a conversation to avoid responsibility, redirect blame, or confuse you. Instead of addressing the issue at hand, they shift the context to something else, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, so that the original concern is buried under new angles, side topics, or emotional diversions. The more this tactic is used, the more you feel like you can never pin them down to accountability, because the conversation is always sliding away into another context. Imagine confronting a partner because they lied about where they were last night. Instead of answering honestly, they shift the context. Why don't you trust me? Your jealousy is the real issue here. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about their dishonesty. It's about your supposed insecurity. You find yourself defending your feelings instead of addressing their behavior. The manipulator has successfully shifted the context from their actions to your reactions. Context shifting can take many forms. Sometimes it's emotional. You bring up their hurtful words, and they counter with, "Well, I've been really stressed at work." Other times it's comparative. "At least I'm not as bad as your ex." Or it might be historical. "You're mad about what I did today, but what about that thing you did last year?" In every case, the purpose is the same, to move the conversation away from the original point, so that the manipulator avoids the discomfort of accountability. This tactic is particularly effective because it creates endless detours. Just when you think you're making progress in addressing an issue, the context shifts. You may start to feel like you're chasing shadows, never quite landing on the real problem. Over time, this erodes your confidence in communicating. You may begin to wonder if you really are focusing on the wrong thing, or if you're being unfair for holding them to the original issue. That self-doubt is exactly what the manipulator wants. Context shifting also appears in group settings. For example, in a workplace meeting, you might point out that a coworker missed an important deadline. Instead of taking responsibility, they say, "Well, the real problem is that we don't have enough resources." Now the focus is no longer on their accountability, it's on a systemic issue that deflects attention from their individual choices. Everyone in the room gets distracted, and the original problem never gets resolved. The context has been successfully shifted to protect them. Another powerful form of context shifting involves weaponizing emotions. If you bring up a legitimate concern, the manipulator may suddenly burst into tears or display anger, changing the emotional climate of the conversation. Now, the context isn't about your concern, it's about their dramatic reaction. You may feel guilty for upsetting them or pressured to comfort them, and in doing so, you abandon your original point. The conversation has once again been hijacked by a shift in context. The psychological impact of repeated context shifting is exhausting. Conversations that should bring clarity instead leave you drained and disoriented. You begin to dread bringing up issues because you know the discussion will never stay on track. Worse, you may internalize the belief that you're bad at communicating, when in reality, the problem is not your clarity, it's their deliberate shifting. Over time, this tactic can deeply damage relationships. Instead of resolving conflicts, problems accumulate, hidden under layers of misdirection. You may notice that the same issues keep resurfacing because they were never actually addressed. The relationship becomes a cycle of frustration, where every attempt at progress dissolves into another detour. This creates a sense of hopelessness. No matter how hard you try to talk things through, nothing changes. Recognizing context shifting requires sharp awareness. Ask yourself, does the conversation consistently stray away from the original point whenever accountability is near? Do you often leave discussions feeling like you never addressed what you came to talk about? Do they bring up unrelated issues, your flaws, or dramatic emotions to redirect the spotlight? If so, you are likely dealing with context shifting. One of the best strategies to counter this tactic is to hold the line. Gently but firmly bring the conversation back to the original issue. I hear what you're saying, but right now I want to focus on what happened yesterday. By refusing to follow every detour, you resist the manipulation. Of course, this is easier said than done, especially when the manipulator escalates to emotional outbursts. But with practice, you can learn to recognize the moment the context shifts and anchor the conversation to reality. At its core, context shifting is about dodging accountability. It allows the manipulator to keep moving the target so they are never hit with responsibility. The tactic thrives on distraction, confusion, and your willingness to follow them down every conversational side street. But once you recognize the pattern, you reclaim the power to stay focused. Because the truth is simple, shifting contexts may blur the conversation, but it never erases what really happened. Sleep deprivation abuse. Sleep is one of the most basic human needs, yet it is also one of the most overlooked areas where manipulation and control can occur. Sleep deprivation abuse is a tactic where a manipulator deliberately disrupts your rest, keeping you awake, waking you up, or creating conditions that prevent deep, restorative sleep in order to weaken your defenses. Over time, lack of sleep erodes mental clarity, emotional stability, and physical health, leaving you far more vulnerable to control. This form of abuse is insidious because it doesn't leave visible scars, yet its effects can be devastating. Think about how you feel after just one night of poor sleep. Irritable, foggy, less patient, and more prone to mistakes. Now imagine this happening repeatedly, engineered by someone who wants you off balance. The manipulator may not even frame it as abuse. They might say they just want to talk things out late at night, choosing arguments right when you're trying to rest. Or they may create noise, pick fights, or engage in emotionally intense conversations at times when you need sleep most. It's not random, it's a strategy. By keeping you exhausted, they ensure you are easier to control. Sleep deprivation. Abuse often hides behind seemingly innocent behaviors. For example, a partner might insist on staying up late to bond, while ignoring your need for rest. They might wake you in the middle of the night with accusations, demands, or sudden crises that require your attention. In families, a toxic parent might repeatedly disturb a child's rest as punishment, making it impossible for them to feel secure or fully alert. In professional environments, an abusive boss might set unrealistic deadlines that force employees to sacrifice sleep in order to keep their jobs. In all of these cases, the lack of sleep is not an accident, it is engineered. The science behind this faux realm of abuse is well documented. Sleep deprivation disrupts the brain's prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and logical reasoning. It also amplifies activity in the amygdala, the brain's fear and emotion center, making you more reactive, more anxious, and more likely to break down. Manipulators know this intuitively. When you're exhausted, you're more likely to give in, apologize just to end the fight, or agree to things you wouldn't normally accept. In other words, sleep deprivation makes you easier to dominate. Psychologically, sleep deprivation abuse also erodes your sense of time and memory. Without proper rest, your ability to recall details weakens. This makes it easier for the manipulator to gaslight you, because you may genuinely forget specifics or struggle to stay sharp in arguments. It also breaks down your resilience. Small problems feel bigger, emotional triggers hit harder, and your ability to regulate your mood deteriorates. Soon, you're not just tired, you're emotionally unstable, and the manipulator can use that instability against you. In intimate relationships, sleep deprivation and abuse can also be used to isolate you. A partner who constantly keeps you awake or interrupts your rest makes it difficult for you to function socially or professionally the next day. You may start canceling plans, underperforming at work, or withdrawing from others because you're too exhausted. This deepens your dependence on the manipulator, since they are the one constant presence in your life, even if they are the source of your fatigue. The cruelty of sleep deprivation abuse lies in how invisible it can be. Outsiders may not understand why you're so drained, distracted, or emotionally frayed. If you explain that your partner keeps waking you up, people might dismiss it as minor or unintentional. But you know the truth. When someone consistently robs you of rest, they are robbing you of clarity, strength, and autonomy. It's a slow erosion of your very ability to stand up for yourself. Over time, the physical toll of sleep deprivation is just as severe as the psychological toll. Chronic sleep loss is linked to weakened immunity, high blood pressure, heart disease, and even reduced lifespan. It makes you more vulnerable to illness and less capable of handling stress. In this way, sleep deprivation abuse doesn't just weaken your mind, it weakens your body, creating a cycle of exhaustion that keeps you dependent and disempowered. Recognizing sleep deprivation abuse requires asking hard questions. Does conflict always happen at night when you need rest? Do you find that your sleep is consistently disrupted by arguments, crises, or unnecessary demands? Do you wake up more tired from emotional exhaustion than physical rest? If so, this is not coincidence. It's control. Healthy relationships respect rest. They recognize that sleep is not a luxury, but a necessity. When someone repeatedly deprives you of it, they're not just keeping you awake, they're keeping you weak. By naming sleep deprivation abuse for what it is, you reclaim the right to rest, to clarity, and to the basic human need for peace. Because true love, true care, and true respect never come at the cost of your health. Selective competence. Competence is usually seen as a strength, knowing how to get things done, solving problems, and stepping up when it matters. But in toxic dynamics, competence can be manipulated into a tool for control. Selective competence is when someone deliberately chooses when to be capable and when to suddenly act helpless, depending on what benefits them most in the moment. It's not that they lack the ability, it's that they withhold it, switching it on and off strategically to avoid responsibility, gain sympathy, or control the workload in relationships, families, or workplaces. On the surface, selective competence can look like forgetfulness, laziness, or even a quirky flaw. A partner might act like they never know how to do the laundry correctly, so you end up doing it every time. A coworker might constantly mess up spreadsheets or emails until you stop asking for their help and take on their share of the work yourself. But watch closely. The same person who can't do basic tasks in one context suddenly becomes skilled, resourceful, and precise when it benefits them. Their incompetence isn't real, it's selective. This tactic often hides behind charm or self-deprecation. A manipulator might say things like, "Oh, I'm just terrible at this stuff. You're so much better at it than me." You feel flattered, maybe even useful, so you take over. At first, it doesn't seem harmful. You're just helping. But over time, the pattern becomes clear. They never learn, never improve, and never step up. Their helplessness is a shield that keeps them free from effort while you carry the burden. Selective competence is also used as a weapon in conflict. For example, if you confront them about forgetting important dates or tasks, they act clueless. "I don't know, I just can't keep track of things like you do." But the same person who can't remember your birthday is every detail of their favorite sport, TV show, or hobby. The inconsistency reveals the truth. They remember what matters to them, but they feign incompetence when it comes to responsibilities they don't want to carry. In families, selective competence can create deeply unbalanced dynamics. A parent might claim they don't know how to cook, clean, or manage household tasks, placing the weight of responsibility on the other parent or even the children. A sibling might act helpless with finances until someone else steps in to manage their bills, while they conveniently remain skilled in areas that bring them pleasure. The result is that others in the family take on disproportionate labor, while the manipulator coasts on their supposed inability. In workplaces, selective competence is particularly toxic. Some employees act incompetent when it comes to difficult or boring tasks, ensuring someone else picks up the slack. But when recognition, promotions, or opportunities arise, they suddenly display full competence, positioning themselves as high performers. This inconsistency allows them to avoid effort while reaping rewards. Coworkers who enable this dynamic often end up burned out, carrying invisible labor while the manipulator stays comfortable. Psychologically, selective competence is corrosive because it creates self-doubt in the people around it. You may wonder if you're being unfair by expecting more. You may even start to believe that they really are helpless, convincing yourself that it's easier to just do it yourself. The manipulator relies on this cycle. By pretending they can't, they train you to stop asking, stop expecting, and stop holding them accountable. Another layer of damage comes from the resentment it creates. Over time, the imbalance becomes obvious. You're doing the heavy lifting while they glide by. Yet if you point it out, they may turn it back on you. You're too controlling. You don't let me help. Or you always think I'm useless. The very act of calling out the manipulation becomes another trap, making you look demanding while they maintain their helpless facade. The truth is, selective competence is not about ability. It's about willingness. People show competence in the areas that matter to them. If someone is capable in some areas, but constantly incompetent in others, it's not a lack of skill. It's a choice. And that choice is about control. Controlling the workload, controlling expectations, and controlling how others see them. Recognizing selective competence requires stepping back and looking for patterns. Do they always fail at tasks that are inconvenient, but succeed in tasks that bring them benefit? Do they consistently lean on you to fix things while showing skill in other areas? Do you notice that you've stopped expecting anything from them because it's easier to just do it yourself? These are signs that their incompetence isn't genuine, it's selective. The long-term consequence of living with selective competence is exhaustion. You end up overburdened, undervalued, and resentful, while the manipulator avoids responsibility and sometimes even earns sympathy for their supposed helplessness. The only way to break the cycle is to refuse to carry what isn't yours. That means resisting the urge to rescue them, even if it means things fall apart for a while. Because real incompetence can improve with effort, but selective competence never will, unless the benefits of manipulation are removed. At its core, selective competence is about avoiding accountability by pretending incapability. It's the guilt harvesting. Guilt is a powerful emotion. When we feel guilty, we want to make things right, restore balance, and prove that we care. Healthy guilt can motivate people to apologize, grow, and build stronger relationships. But in toxic dynamics, guilt is not a natural emotion, it's a tool. Guilt harvesting is the deliberate act of cultivating and collecting your guilt so it can be used as leverage. The manipulator plants seeds of guilt in your mind, waters them with reminders, and then harvests that guilt later to get compliance, sympathy, or control. The process often begins with subtle comments designed to make you feel responsible for their happiness, pain, or struggles. For example, a partner might say, "If you really loved me, you wouldn't need so much time with your friends." A parent might sigh and say, "After all I've sacrificed for you, this is how you repay me?" A coworker might remark, "I guess I'll stay late again since nobody else cares enough to help." These statements are not innocent. They are emotional traps. They make you feel like you're failing, even when you've done nothing wrong. Over time, the manipulator collects these little bits of guilt like tokens. Each time you falter, forget something, or assert your boundaries, they remind you of your debt. "Remember how I forgave you last time? After all I've done for you, this is how you treat me? Don't you feel bad after everything I've put up with?" The guilt piles up, and before long you find yourself making decisions not out of free will but out of obligation and shame. Guilt harvesting is especially damaging in close relationships. In romantic partnerships, it can make you feel like you're constantly falling short. Instead of being loved for who you are, you feel like you're always paying off an invisible debt. In families, guilt harvesting can keep children bound to unhealthy parents, while psychologically, guilt harvesting takes a toll because it creates learned helplessness. No matter how much you give, it never feels like enough. You start to believe that you are inherently selfish, ungrateful, or flawed. This internalized guilt makes it harder to resist because the manipulator's voice begins to sound like your own. You may even preemptively punish yourself, overgiving or over-apologizing before they have the chance to demand it. The long-term impact of guilt harvesting is emotional exhaustion. Living under constant guilt drains joy and spontaneity from your life. Decisions stop being about what you want or need and start being about how to avoid feeling guilty. Your freedom shrinks, your confidence erodes, and your identity becomes entangled in constantly trying to prove yourself to someone who never intended to let you feel enough. Recognizing guilt harvesting requires separating genuine responsibility from manufactured obligation. Ask yourself, do I feel guilty because I truly did something wrong, or because someone is using guilt to control me? Do they forgive and move forward when I make mistakes, or do they store them up to use later? Do I feel like my life is my own, or like I am living under a constant shadow of debt? If the guilt never ends, you are likely being manipulated. Healthy relationships don't weaponize guilt. They acknowledge mistakes, offer forgiveness, and move on. Guilt harvesting does the opposite. It traps you in a cycle where you are never free from past errors, never free from emotional debt, and never free to simply exist without proving your worth. The manipulator benefits from this harvest, feeding off your compliance and emotional labor while you are left depleted. At its core, guilt harvesting is about control through shame. It's the art of planting doubt in your worth and then exploiting that doubt to get what they... Punitive generosity, generosity when genuine, is one of the purest expressions of love and care. True giving comes without strings, without the expectation of repayment, and without hidden motives. But generosity can be twisted into something darker when it is used as a weapon. Punitive generosity is the act of giving gifts, favors, or acts of service not out of love, but as a way to exert control, create obligation, or punish through the weight of indebtedness. It looks like kindness on the surface, but underneath, it is deeply manipulative. At first, punitive generosity can feel flattering. A partner might shower you with gifts, do grand favors, or go above and beyond in ways that make you feel special. A parent might provide financial support, constantly reminding you how much they've done for you. A friend might insist on paying for everything, even when you protest. To outsiders, it looks like you're lucky to have someone so giving. But the truth emerges later. The generosity was not free. It was a trap. The key to punitive generosity lies in the expectations attached. When the manipulator gives, they don't let you forget it. They bring up their kindness every time they want to silence you, win an argument, or make you feel guilty. After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me? I paid for all those things and you can't even do this one thing for me? The gift becomes a weapon, the favor becomes leverage, and the generosity becomes punishment. You are no longer free to disagree, say no, or set boundaries because you feel indebted. One of the cruelest aspects of punitive generosity is its invisibility. If you complain about it, others may not understand. How can generosity be abusive? From the outside, the manipulator looks like a saint. People might say, you should be grateful, or at least they're giving you something. This makes it even. Psychologically, punitive generosity is exhausting because it forces you into a cycle of constant repayment. You never feel free to simply accept kindness. Instead, you feel like every gift, favor, or gesture comes with invisible strings attached. You may even start rejecting help or kindness altogether, fearing the inevitable price tag. Over time, this erodes your ability to trust not just the manipulator, but others as well. The long-term impact is profound. Living under punitive generosity can make you feel unworthy, as though you are always in debt and can never break even. You may internalize the belief that you owe your life, your choices, and even your freedom to the person who has given you so much. This false debt keeps you stuck, obedient, and compliant, while the manipulator maintains power without ever needing to raise their voice. Recognizing punitive generosity requires asking, is this gift or act of kindness freely given, or is it being used against me later? Do I feel loved and supported or indebted and controlled? Does this generosity create freedom, or does it take it away? If you feel trapped instead of cared for, you are not dealing with real generosity. You are dealing with a weaponized version of it. True generosity never punishes. It doesn't demand repayment, obedience, or silence. It comes from love, not leverage. Punitive generosity, on the other hand, is a wolf in sheep's clothing. kindness that conceals a leash. Once you name it for what it is, you begin to cut those invisible strings, reclaiming the truth that real love and real care never make you feel like a debtor in your own life. Devaluing achievements, one of the deepest human needs is the need to feel seen, appreciated, and valued for our efforts. Whether it's big milestones or small everyday victories, recognition fuels confidence and strengthens relationships. But in toxic dynamics, this natural human need is twisted into a weapon. Devaluing achievements is the act of dismissing, minimizing, or mocking someone's successes in order to keep them small, dependent, and insecure. Instead of celebrating your wins, the manipulator diminishes them because your growth threatens their control. Devaluing achievements often begins subtly. Maybe you land a promotion at work and your partner casually says, "Well, it's not like you're the CEO yet." Or you finish a challenging project and your friend shrugs, "Anyone could have done that if they had enough time." In these moments, the pride you felt in your accomplishment is undercut. You still know you achieved something, but it no longer feels special. The manipulator has succeeded in dimming your light just enough to keep you from shining too brightly. In romantic relationships, devaluing achievements can become a recurring theme. A toxic partner might dismiss your successes with sarcasm. "Don't let it go to your head," or they may claim credit for your accomplishments. "You wouldn't have gotten that job without my support." Instead of building you up, they anchor you down, ensuring you never forget that they are the center of your story. Over time, this makes you associate achievement not with joy, but with tension, conflict, or shame. In families, devaluing achievements often comes from parents or siblings who feel threatened by your growth. A parent might downplay your milestones to maintain authority. Good grades don't mean anything in the real world. A sibling might mock your accomplishments to keep you from surpassing them. These messages plant seeds. The long-term consequences are profound. Living under constant minimization can lead to chronic low self-esteem, perfectionism, and even burnout. You may keep striving for bigger and bigger goals, hoping one day the achievement will be big enough to finally earn validation. But the manipulator's game has no finish line. No matter what you do, they will always find a way to cut it down. And in chasing their approval, you risk losing sight of your own worth. Recognizing devaluing achievements requires noticing the patterns. Do the people around you consistently respond to your successes with dismissal, sarcasm, or competition? Do you feel smaller, not bigger, after sharing your wins? Do you find yourself hiding your achievements to avoid conflict? If so, you are not being too sensitive. You are being devalued. Healthy relationships celebrate growth. They make space for joy, pride, and recognition, no matter how big or small the achievement. Toxic dynamics, on the other hand, treat achievements as threats. By minimizing them, manipulators keep you dependent, insecure, and less likely to outgrow their control. At its core, devaluing achievements is about stealing the fuel of your self-worth. The manipulator knows that confidence breeds independence, and independence weakens their grip, so they chip away at your pride, one sarcastic comment or dismissive shrug at a time. But once you see the pattern, you can begin reclaiming your victories, not for their approval, but for yourself. Because your achievements are valid, your progress is real, and no amount of minimization can erase the truth of what you've accomplished. Forced teaming, on the surface, teamwork sounds positive. Words like together, we, and us usually signal unity, connection, and shared purpose. But in the wrong hands, these same words can be twisted into manipulation. Forced teaming is a tactic where someone pretends to be aligned with you, making it seem like you're on the same side, when in reality, their togetherness is just a strategy to lower your guard, silence your objections, or drag you into situations you don't want. The essence of forced teaming is the manipulator's use of inclusive language to blur boundaries. They say things like, "We're in this together," "We need to stick together," or "We're a team, right?" These phrases might sound harmless, even supportive, but they create an illusion of shared goals where none truly exist. Instead of respecting your individuality, the manipulator tries to bind you into an alliance that serves their interests. A classic example of forced teaming happens in unsafe encounters. For instance, a stranger might approach you in a parking lot at night and say, "Looks like we both had a long day. Let's walk together." By framing the interaction as "we," they reduce the chances of you resisting, because refusing might feel rude or overly cautious. But the truth is, their team is a trap. It's a way of getting closer without your consent. In relationships, forced teaming can be far more subtle. A partner might dismiss your boundaries by saying, "Come on, we're a couple. We don't keep secrets from each other." On the surface, it sounds like intimacy, but really it's pressure, an attempt to override your autonomy by framing disagreement as betrayal of the team. If you resist, they accuse you of not being committed, not being loving enough, or not being on their side. The supposed team becomes a tool of coercion. In workplaces, forced teaming often shows up when a manipulate. Recognizing forced teaming requires paying attention to the language of we. Is it mutual and supportive, or is it one-sided and coercive? Do you feel stronger and freer in this team, or do you feel trapped, silenced, or pressured? Healthy teamwork is collaborative, chosen, and empowering. Forced teaming is manipulative, unchosen, and disempowering. One powerful strategy for resisting forced teaming is to reassert your individuality. When someone says, "We need to do this," you can calmly respond, "That's what you want. I need something different." By drawing a line between we and I, you break the illusion of forced unity. It may create tension, but it also reclaims your right to autonomy. At its core, forced teaming is about blurring boundaries through language. It sounds like closeness, but it's really control. It makes refusal feel like betrayal, and it disguises manipulation as partnership. But once you see it clearly, you realize that not every we is real. Some are traps designed to bind you to someone else's agenda. And the truth is, genuine teamwork doesn't need to be forced. It's chosen freely, built on trust, and rooted in mutual respect. Intermittent reinforcement, one of the most powerful forms of psychological manipulation, doesn't come from outright cruelty. It comes from unpredictability. Intermittent reinforcement is a tactic where rewards, affection, or approval are given inconsistently, at random intervals, so that the target never knows when or how the next good moment will arrive. This creates a cycle of hope and desperation, trapping you in an addictive pattern where you keep chasing the manipulator's approval, even while suffering through long stretches of neglect or mistreatment. To understand how this works, it helps to think about slot machines. When someone pulls the lever on a slot machine, they don't win every time. Sometimes they lose, sometimes they win a little, and occasionally they hit a jackpot. That unpredictability, the not knowing when the reward will come, creates a powerful psychological hook. People keep playing, not because they always win, but because every so often they do, and that tiny reward keeps them hooked. Intermittent reinforcement in relationships works the same way. A manipulative partner, for example, might ignore your needs most of the time, criticize you, or withdraw affection. But then, suddenly, they surprise you with affection, praise, or a small gesture of love. That random jackpot floods you with relief and joy. Instead of questioning why the love is so inconsistent, you focus on the high of finally getting it. You think, if I just try harder, maybe I can make this happen more often. And so you stay, working harder and harder for scraps of affection that should have been freely given in the first place. In families, intermittent reinforcement can be equally devastating. A parent might alternate between harsh criticism and rare moments of warmth. A child learns to cling desperately to those fleeting positive moments, hoping that if they behave just right, the parent will be kind again. This sets up a lifetime pattern of chasing approval from emotionally unavailable people, because love has been wired into the brain as something unstable, conditional, and rare. Workplaces also use this tactic. A toxic boss might constantly criticize employees, but occasionally offer sudden praise or unexpected bonuses. The result? Employees remain loyal despite poor treatment, hoping that if they work hard enough, they'll get another moment of recognition. The inconsistency keeps people anxious, hypervigilant, and constantly striving for approval. The psychological damage of intermittent reinforcement lies in its ability to create trauma bonds. These bonds form when cycles of mistreatment are punctuated with occasional rewards, creating a confusing mix of fear and attachment. The brain learns to associate the manipulator with both pain and relief, making it extremely difficult to leave. Even when logic says, "This person hurts me," the emotional memory of those rare good moments whispers, "But they can be so kind. Maybe it will get better." Intermittent reinforcement also erodes self-worth. Because the rewards are inconsistent, You begin to believe that the problem is you, that you're not good enough, lovable enough, or hardworking enough to earn consistent love. Instead of blaming the manipulator, you blame yourself, doubling down on your efforts to win them over. This self-blame is exactly what the manipulator wants. It keeps you hooked, compliant, and less likely to walk away. The cruelty of intermittent reinforcement is that it weaponizes hope. Hope that things will change. Hope that the good moments will last. Hope that the manipulator will finally become the person they pretended to be in the beginning. That hope is powerful enough to keep people stuck in toxic dynamics for years, even decades. And because the rewards are rare, they feel even more precious, like finding water in a desert. You cling to every drop, even though you're dying of thirst. Recognizing intermittent reinforcement requires stepping back and seeing the larger pattern. Ask yourself, are the good moments consistent and reliable, or are they rare and unpredictable? Do I feel constantly anxious, always waiting for the next high? Do I stay in this relationship, job, or friendship, not because it's healthy, but because I'm chasing the memory of how good it can be? If so, you may be caught in this cycle. The antidote to intermittent reinforcement is stability. Healthy love, healthy friendship, and healthy leadership are consistent. They don't make you guess when affection, respect, or recognition will appear. They don't punish you with silence and then throw you a bone of kindness to keep you hooked. They show up reliably, with care and respect you can count on. At its core, intermittent reinforcement is about control through unpredictability. It hooks you not by giving too much or too little, but by giving just enough at just the right time to keep you tethered. Once you see it clearly, the illusion breaks. Those jackpots aren't proof of love. They're part of the trap. And real love doesn't come in random bursts. It comes steady, consistent, and without conditions. Reactive abuse setup. Reactive abuse is one of the most insidious forms of psychological manipulation because it turns the tables, making the victim look like the aggressor. A reactive abuse setup happens when a manipulator deliberately provokes, pressures, or pushes you into an emotional reaction, then points to your reaction as proof that you are the real abuser. It's not just a trick, it's a strategy designed to shift blame, discredit you, and justify their mistreatment. The cycle usually starts with subtle needling. A partner might criticize you relentlessly, mock your insecurities, or stonewall you during an important conversation. You try to stay calm, but the constant provocation builds up inside like steam in a pressure cooker. Eventually, you snap. You raise your voice, you curse, or you slam a door. At that exact moment, they pounce. See? This is why I can't talk to you. You're crazy. You're abusive. What they never mention is how they engineered the outburst in the first place. In families, reactive abuse setups can be a lifelong pattern. A toxic parent may shame, belittle, or humiliate a child until the child finally talks back or explodes. The parent then declares, "Look how disrespectful you are. You're impossible to deal with." The child grows up believing they are the problem, while the parent's provocations remain hidden. Over time, this creates deep shame and confusion about their own emotions, because they only ever see their reaction, not the abuse that triggered it. Workplaces also foster reactive abuse setups. A manipulative boss might micromanage, sabotage, or humiliate an employee until the employee finally snaps in frustration. Once they do, the boss reports them to HR as unprofessional or hostile. Colleagues who didn't witness the setup only see the reaction, so the victim's credibility and reputation are damaged. The manipulator walks away, looking calm and reasonable, while the victim is labeled as volatile. The cruelty of reactive abuse setups lies in how they exploit human emotion. Everyone has limits. Everyone can be provoked. Manipulators know this, and they deliberately create conditions where you are pushed beyond yours. Then, instead of acknowledging the buildup, they isolate the outburst, stripping it from its context. Suddenly, your anger, tears, or defensiveness becomes the entire story, while their long chain of provocations disappears into the background. Psychologically, this tactic is devastating because it creates self-doubt. After enough setups, you start to wonder, am I the abuser? Am I the problem? You replay your reactions in your head, feeling shame for every time you raised your voice or lost your temper. The manipulator reinforces this doubt by labeling you as toxic, unstable, or crazy, while presenting themselves as calm and composed. This gaslighting makes it harder to trust your own perception, because the evidence of your outbursts seems undeniable. Another layer of damage comes from the way reactive abuse setups erode your relationships with others. Manipulators are often strategic about provoking you in public or in front of witnesses. That way, when you explode, others see only your reaction. To outsiders, you look like the aggressor, and the manipulator looks like the victim. This creates isolation, because people around you may start believing their version of events. You're left not only doubting yourself, but also feeling misunderstood and unsupported. Over time, reactive abuse setups can condition you into silence. You become so afraid of losing control that you suppress your emotions, even when you're being mistreated. The manipulator thrives in this environment because your silence gives them free rein to continue their behavior unchecked. Worse, the bottled-up frustration often leads to bigger outbursts later, which only reinforces their narrative that you are the problem. Recognizing reactive abuse setups requires stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. Ask yourself, do I only act out of character after prolonged provocation? Does this person stay calm while pushing me to my breaking point? Do they highlight my reactions while ignoring their role in creating them? If so, you are likely being set up. One way to counter this tactic is to document patterns. Journaling, recording incidents, or confiding in trusted friends can help you see the provocations that lead to your reactions. This helps you separate genuine accountability for how you express your emotions from manufactured blame for being provoked in the first place. It also provides a record that exposes the manipulator's setups over time. Healthy relationships don't weaponize your emotions. They allow space for frustration, anger, and disagreement without turning those feelings into ammunition. Reactive abuse setups, on the other hand, weaponize your humanity. They turn your reactions into proof of guilt while erasing the abuse that caused them. At its core, reactive abuse setups are about control through reversal. They push you into becoming the very thing you're not, the aggressor, so the manipulator can avoid accountability and tighten their grip. But once you see the pattern, the illusion cracks. You realize that your reactions don't define you, the setup does. And with that awareness, you can reclaim your power, refusing to play the role they've scripted for you, isolating through praise. At first glance, praise seems like a positive thing. Compliments, recognition, and admiration are what most of us long for, especially from people we care about. Genuine praise builds confidence and strengthens relationships. But when praise is used as a manipulation tool, it becomes a cage. Isolating through praise is a tactic where someone showers you with flattery and admiration in ways that subtly separate you from others, making you dependent on their validation while cutting off alternative sources of support. This tactic usually begins with what feels like harmless or even wonderful compliments. A manipulative partner might say things like, "You're so much smarter than your friends, you don't even need them," or "Nobody understands you like I do, you're different from everyone else." On the surface, these words feel affirming. You feel special, chosen, unique, but hidden in the compliment is a wedge. It sets you apart from others, framing the manipulator as your only true admirer, the only person who gets you. Over time, the praise becomes more pointed. They might tell you, "Your family doesn't really appreciate how amazing you are. I'm the only one who sees your worth." Or, "Your coworkers don't deserve to work with someone as talented as you. Honestly, you should just avoid them." The praise is still wrapped in positive language, but the effect is isolating. Each compliment is a subtle dig at your other relationships, creating doubt, distance, and dependency. In romantic relationships, isolating through praise often feels intoxicating at first. The manipulator seems to elevate you above everyone else, putting you on a pedestal. But pedestals are lonely places. Once you're up there, you find yourself increasingly cut off from friends, family, and outside perspectives. And because the praise is addictive, it feels so good to be admired. You may not notice the isolation creeping in. You start craving their approval as your main source of validation, while other connections fade into the background. In families, this tactic can show up as favoritism. A parent might single out one child as the special one, praising them in contrast to siblings. While it may feel good at first, it drives wedges between family members and fosters resentment. The child grows up both elevated and isolated, dependent on the parent's praise while disconnected from sibling support. This is not true love. It's control disguised as admiration. Workplaces also reward isolating through praise. A manipulative boss might tell you, "You're the only one I can trust with this project. The others just don't measure up." On the surface, it feels like a compliment. You're trusted, valued, and elevated. But the underlying message isolates you from your peers, creating unnecessary competition and mistrust. You become dependent on the boss's approval and more vulnerable to exploitation because you don't feel like part of the team anymore. You feel like the chosen one. The psychological power of isolating through praise lies in how it exploits the human need for recognition. Everyone wants to feel seen and appreciated. Manipulators weaponize this by offering praise that is conditional, strategic, and comparative. It's not simply "you're great," it's "you're great, unlike them." That comparison cuts you off from others and ties your sense of worth directly to the manipulator's opinion. Over time, this tactic creates deep dependency. You may start to mistrust others, believing that only the manipulator truly understands or appreciates you. You may even cut ties with supportive friends or loved ones, thinking they don't value you enough. Meanwhile, your entire self-esteem becomes tied to the manipulator's validation. When they praise you, you feel high. When they withhold it, you feel empty. The praise, once uplifting, becomes a leash. Another layer of cruelty is how isolating through praise can flip into devaluation. Once you are sufficiently isolated, the manipulator may begin withdrawing praise or even criticizing you. By then, you're already cut off from other sources of validation, so you cling desperately to their approval. This cycle of elevation and withdrawal keeps you hooked, constantly working for the next crumb of admiration. Recognizing isolating through praise requires looking beneath the surface of compliments. Ask yourself, does this praise make me feel closer to others or farther from them? Does it build my confidence broadly, or does it tie my worth specifically to this one person's opinion? Does it celebrate me as I am, or does it compare me against others in a way that isolates me? If the praise divides rather than unites, it's not love, it's manipulation. Healthy praise uplifts without isolating. It celebrates without comparison. It makes you feel confident, not dependent. It strengthens your connection to others instead of weakening it. Isolating praise, on the other hand, is a velvet trap, a soft and flattering cage that feels like admiration but functions as control. At its core, isolating through praise is about control disguised as kindness. It's the manipulator saying, "I'm the only one who truly sees you," while secretly working to ensure that they are, in fact, the only one you have left. But once you see the strings behind, the compliments, the trap loses its power. You begin to reclaim praise as what it should always be, genuine, free, and never a tool to isolate you from the people who love you for real. Cognitive exhaustion. Cognitive exhaustion is a weapon that many manipulators wield quietly but effectively. It doesn't leave bruises, and it doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. Instead, it builds slowly, draining you of mental energy until you are too worn down to resist, question, or even think clearly. Cognitive exhaustion is the deliberate overloading of your mind through endless arguments, contradictions, distractions, or demands, so that your ability to analyze, make decisions, or stand firm weakens over time. To understand this tactic, picture your brain like a smartphone battery. Under normal use, it recharges at night, handles tasks during the day, and holds enough charge to get you through. But when a manipulator bombards you with constant notifications, arguments, emotional demands, shifting stories, contradictions, the battery drains faster than you can recharge. Eventually, you hit a point where you will agree to anything just to make the noise stop. That's the manipulator's goal. One of the most common forms of cognitive exhaustion is circular conversations. You try to bring up an issue, and they keep talking in loops, denying, deflecting, or shifting contexts, which ties back to other tactics. Hours pass, yet you're no closer to resolution. Instead, you feel mentally drained, doubting yourself, and too tired to argue anymore. By sheer endurance, the manipulator wins. Not because they're right, but because you've run out of energy to fight. Another method is information overload. A manipulative coworker might drown you in irrelevant details during a disagreement, burying the main issue under a mountain of side points. A toxic partner might bring up 5 unrelated arguments at once, so you can't possibly defend yourself on every front. This tactic works because the human brain has limited working memory. When overwhelmed, it defaults to survival, agreeing, apologizing, or retreating just to regain peace. In families, cognitive exhaustion can come from constant demands and contradictions. A controlling parent, for instance, might insist on perfection. Do better in school, but don't act too smart. Be independent, but don't forget you owe me everything. The mixed messages create a no-win situation where the child spends endless energy trying to please, but never succeeds. Over time, the exhaustion becomes internalized. The child grows into an adult who second-guesses every choice, already drained before they even begin. Romantic relationships magnify this tactic through emotional whiplash. One day, your partner showers you with love. The next, they withdraw completely. They demand constant reassurance but never offer stability. Your mind is in overdrive, analyzing every word, every tone, every silence, trying to decode what's happening. The mental strain of constantly being on guard eventually wears you down to the point where you stop analyzing altogether. You just comply. That surrender is the manipulator's victory. Psychologically, cognitive exhaustion works because mental energy is finite. Studies show that decision-making, willpower, and self-control all draw from the same pool of cognitive resources. When that pool is drained, you're more likely to make impulsive choices, overlook red flags, and agree to things against your best interests. Manipulators exploit this by keeping you in a constant state of fatigue, knowing that a tired mind is a compliant mind. Another cruel dimension of cognitive exhaustion is its invisibility. Outsiders may not see the hours of arguments, the constant contradictions, or the emotional ping-pong that drains you. They only see the aftermath, you looking confused, indecisive, or passive. Worse, manipulators often highlight this. See, you're so forgetful, you're always confused, you can't handle things. They frame the exhaustion they created as proof of your weakness, deepening your self-doubt. Over time, living under cognitive exhaustion reshapes your entire way of thinking. You may stop trusting your memory, second-guess every decision, and feel incapable of solving problems. You may even start believing the manipulator's narrative that you are weak or crazy. This mental fog is not your natural state. It's the product of sustained, deliberate draining. Recognizing cognitive exhaustion means noticing patterns. Do you often leave conversations more confused than when they started? Do you feel like you can't think straight around this person, even though you function fine elsewhere? Do you give in, not because you agree, but because you're too tired to keep explaining? These are red flags that your mental energy is being deliberately drained. The antidote to cognitive exhaustion is boundaries and breaks. Stepping away from conversations, refusing to argue in circles, and limiting exposure to manipulative demands helps preserve your mental energy. Just like your phone needs a charger, your brain needs rest, clarity, and silence to recover. Healthy relationships respect that. Toxic ones exploit the lack of it. At its core, cognitive exhaustion is about disarming your mind. The manipulator doesn't need to overpower you physically. They just need to wear you down mentally until resistance feels impossible. But once you see the tactic clearly, you can begin conserving your energy, refusing to play the endless mental games. Because your clarity is your power, and your exhaustion is their weapon. Boundary testing. Boundaries are the invisible lines that protect our well-being. They define what's acceptable and what isn't, what we're comfortable with and what crosses the line. Healthy people respect boundaries, even if they don't fully understand them, because they recognize that boundaries are not barriers to love. They are the structure that makes love safe. Manipulators, however, see boundaries as obstacles to control. Boundary testing is the deliberate act of pushing, prodding, and subtly crossing those lines to see how much they can get away with, how flexible you are, and how far they can go before you resist. At first, boundary testing often appears harmless. A friend might borrow something without asking. A partner might tease you in a way that makes you uncomfortable, then laugh it off. Relax, it's just a joke. A coworker might casually invade your workspace. Each incident is small, almost trivial. If you call it out, you risk looking uptight. If you don't, they quietly register that your boundary is soft and can be crossed again. That's the test. Will you enforce your line, or will you let it slide? Once the manipulator knows your boundaries are negotiable, they escalate. The borrowed item becomes a permanent gift. The joke becomes a sharper jab, delivered in front of others. The workspace invasion becomes outright micromanaging. With each test, they push further, watching to see if you resist or comply. The moment you give in, even once, they interpret it not as kindness or flexibility, but as permission. What you thought was a one-time concession becomes the new baseline. In romantic relationships, boundary testing often begins in subtle but deeply telling ways. A partner might pressure you to share more than you're ready to, test your comfort with physical intimacy, or insist on access to your phone or social media. If you hesitate, they accuse you of not trusting them. If you give in, they learn that guilt works. From there, boundaries fall one by one, not in dramatic leaps, but in quiet, calculated steps. By the time you realize how much you've conceded, your personal space, privacy, and autonomy may be nearly gone. In families, boundary testing can take the form of parents overriding adult children's choices. For example, a parent might show up unannounced at your home, just to check in, even though you've asked for notice. If you don't confront it, they keep doing it, or they may pressure you into sharing private details of your life under the guise of concern, when in reality, they're gathering control. The testing is framed as love, but the underlying message is clear. Your boundaries don't apply to me. Workplaces are full of boundary testing too. A boss might ask you to stay late just this once, knowing full well that if you agree, they can ask again. A colleague might touch your belongings without permission or cross professional lines with jokes that make you uncomfortable. If you don't push back, those small intrusions grow. Soon, just this once becomes every week, and the inappropriate comments become normalized. Psychologically, boundary testing is effective because it thrives in the gray areas. Each violation is small enough to make you doubt yourself. You wonder, am I overreacting? Am I being too rigid? The manipulator counts on this hesitation. They know that most people want to avoid conflict, so they keep their tests subtle, banking on your discomfort with confrontation. Over time, this erodes your confidence, making it harder to assert your boundaries at all. Another layer of damage is the guilt they attach to your resistance. If you say no, they frame it as selfish, cold, or unfair. Wow, you can't even do this one little thing for me? I thought we were closer than that. This guilt-tripping turns your act of self-protection into something shameful, conditioning you to equate boundary enforcement with hurting others. The result? You lower your walls, not because you want to, but because you've been manipulated into feeling bad for having them. Over time, constant boundary testing reshapes your identity. You may stop setting boundaries altogether, convinced that it's easier to give in than to fight. You may even forget what your boundaries are, because they've been crossed so often that the lines are blurred. This loss of self creates fertile ground for deeper abuse, because once your boundaries are gone, the manipulator has full access to your time, energy, and emotions. Recognizing boundary testing requires paying close attention to patterns. Do small requests or intrusions always seem to escalate? Do they minimize your discomfort, laugh off your objections, or guilt you when you say no? Do you often leave interactions feeling like you've given up more than you intended? These are signs that your boundaries are being tested and weakened. The antidote to boundary testing is clarity and consistency. Boundaries must be expressed clearly, but more importantly, they must be enforced consistently. If you bend just this once, the manipulator learns that your boundary is negotiable. But if you calmly and firmly hold the line every time, the test fails. Healthy people will respect your boundary once it's communicated. Manipulators will push harder, revealing themselves in the process. At its core, boundary testing is about mapping your defenses. The manipulator isn't just crossing lines randomly. They're studying you, learning where you're strong and where you're weak. Once they know the soft spots, they exploit them. But once you recognize the test, you can turn it around. Every time you hold your boundary, you're not just protecting yourself. You're teaching the manipulator that your lines are not for negotiation. Circular conversations, communication is supposed to bring clarity. Healthy conversations solve problems, share perspectives, and build understanding. But manipulators often use communication for the opposite purpose, not to clarify, but to confuse. Circular conversations are a deliberate tactic where discussions go nowhere, looping endlessly, shifting focus, or doubling back, so that you never get resolution, closure or accountability. Instead, you leave the conversation drained, frustrated, and doubting yourself, while the manipulator maintains control. At first, circular conversations may look like simple miscommunication. You bring up an issue, they deflect. You rephrase, they twist your words. You explain again, and they bring up something completely unrelated. Before you know it, hours have passed, and you're no closer to solving the original problem. The manipulator's goal isn't to resolve, it's to exhaust. Every loop you run through drains your mental energy, making you more likely to give up or give in. One of the most common forms of circular conversation happens during conflict with a partner. Suppose you say, "I felt hurt when you canceled our plans without telling me." Instead of addressing the concern, they respond with, "Well, you're always too busy for me anyway." Now the topic has shifted. You try to return to the original point, but they interrupt with, "Why are you always so negative? We never talk about the good things." The conversation spirals further away from the issue until you're stuck defending your tone, your priorities, or your very character, while the real problem is buried. In families, circular conversations often appear when confronting a parent about harmful behavior. A child might say, "You yelled at me and it scared me." The parent replies, "I only yelled because you don't listen." The child insists, "But yelling still hurt me." The parent snaps back, "You think I'm a bad parent after everything I've done for you?" What began as a request for accountability has turned into a never-ending loop of guilt, blame, and defensiveness. The conversation never ends because it was never meant to end. It was meant to wear you down. Workplaces are fertile ground for this tactic as well. A boss might respond to concerns about workload with endless explanations about company pressures, market challenges, or how things used to be. Each attempt to return to the actual concern is met with another tangent. By the end, the employee feels drained, unheard, and reluctant to bring up problems again. The boss doesn't have to solve anything. Just talking in circles is enough to maintain the status quo. The psychological damage of circular conversations lies in their erosion of confidence. When every attempt to clarify is met with confusion, contradiction, or endless detours, you begin to doubt your ability to communicate. You may think, maybe I'm not explaining well, maybe I'm overcomplicating things. But the truth is, it's not you. The manipulator is intentionally keeping the loop going. They know that clarity empowers you and confusion disarms you. Another layer of harm is the way circular conversations consume time and energy. Hours lost in fruitless discussions leave you emotionally drained, mentally foggy, and less capable of standing firm. The exhaustion becomes part of the control. Eventually, you may stop bringing up concerns altogether, convinced that talking doesn't help. That silence is the manipulator's ultimate win. By keeping you trapped in circles long enough, they condition you to give up. Circular conversations also serve as a form of gaslighting. Because the manipulator constantly shifts topics, contradicts themselves, or denies past statements, you may start to feel like you're losing track of reality. They might say one thing today and deny it tomorrow, insisting, "That's not what I said." You try to pin down the facts, but the conversation keeps spinning, leaving you uncertain about what was said, what was meant, and whether you're remembering correctly. This confusion is not accidental, it's engineered. Recognizing circular conversations requires stepping outside the loop. Ask yourself, does this discussion keep coming back to the same point without resolution? Do I feel more confused the longer we talk? Do I leave conversations feeling drained instead of understood? If the answer is yes, you're not in a real dialogue, you're in a manipulation trap. The antidote is boundaries. Refuse to engage endlessly. State your point clearly once or twice, and if the conversation loops, step away. We're going in circles. I've said what I needed to say, and I'm not going to keep repeating myself. Healthy people will respect this and work toward resolution. Manipulators will resist, because the loop is their weapon. At its core, circular conversation is about control through exhaustion. It's not about solving, but stalling. It's not about clarity, but confusion. It's a treadmill designed to keep you running until you collapse, while the manipulator stands still. But once you see the circle for what it is, you can step off the treadmill, conserve your energy, and refuse to be spun in endless loops. Invalidation through sympathy. At first glance, sympathy looks like care. When someone says, "I feel bad for you," or That must be hard. It sounds supportive. But in the hands of a manipulator, sympathy can be turned into a silencing tool. Invalidation through sympathy happens when someone expresses shallow, performative pity for your struggles in a way that dismisses your real feelings, trivializes your pain, or prevents meaningful change. It's a sugar-coated dismissal. It sounds like compassion, but it keeps you stuck, unheard, and minimized. This tactic often appears in subtle ways. Imagine sharing with a friend that you feel deeply hurt by how they excluded you from an important event. Instead of apologizing or addressing the exclusion, they sigh and say, "Oh, poor you. You're always so sensitive." On the surface, it might look like they're acknowledging your pain, but in reality, they've just invalidated it. They've framed your hurt as an overreaction, wrapped in a veneer of sympathy. In relationships, invalidation through sympathy often takes the form of patronizing concern. A partner might respond to your frustration with, "Oh, I'm sorry you're upset, but you know I didn't mean it." The "all" isn't empathy. It's dismissal dressed up as care. It shifts the focus from accountability to a shallow pity that leaves your original concern unaddressed. You're left feeling both silenced and guilty for even bringing it up. In families, this tactic is devastatingly common. A child might say, "It hurt when you yelled at me." The parent responds, "Poor thing, I guess life is just too hard for you, huh?" The words sound sympathetic, but the tone drips with condescension. The child learns that expressing pain leads to mockery disguised as care. Over time, they may stop voicing their feelings altogether, internalizing the belief that their emotions don't matter. Workplaces seats. This too. An employee might express burnout from constant overtime. Instead of addressing the workload, the manager responds, "I feel so sorry for you, but that's just how the job is." The sympathy creates the illusion of understanding, but it's hollow. Nothing changes, and the burden remains. The care was never meant to support. It was meant to pacify. The psychological power of invalidation through sympathy lies in how it twists empathy into control. Humans crave to be seen and understood. When sympathy is offered, the brain initially interprets it as validation. But when that sympathy is shallow or patronizing, it creates dissonance. You feel momentarily acknowledged, but quickly realize your core need, being taken seriously, wasn't met. This confusion makes you less likely to press further because you don't want to seem ungrateful for the kindness you received. Another layer of harm is the way this tactic infantilizes you. By framing your pain as something to pity rather than something to respect, the manipulator positions themselves as superior, stronger, wiser, more capable. You become the fragile one, the one to be pitied. This power imbalance reinforces their control while undermining your sense of agency. Over time, invalidation through sympathy erodes your trust in your own emotions. You may start to believe that your pain really is too much, that your needs are unreasonable, or that you should just toughen up. The more your feelings are minimized under the guise of sympathy, the less confident you become in expressing them. Eventually, silence feels safer than the humiliation of false compassion. Recognizing this tactic requires looking beyond the words to the effect. Ask yourself, does the sympathy actually address my concern, or does it shut it down? Do I feel heard and respected, or do I feel dismissed and belittled? Does the other person take accountability or make changes, or do they just offer empty pity and move on? Genuine sympathy validates and supports. False sympathy invalidates and controls. The antidote to invalidation through sympathy is to call out the dismissal beneath the care. For example, if someone says, "Oh, poor you, I didn't mean it," you can respond, "I'm not asking for pity, I'm asking to be heard." This reframes the conversation, forcing it back to the core issue rather than the manipulator's performance of care. Healthy people will respond to this with openness. Manipulators will double down, exposing their true motives. At its core, invalidation through sympathy is about silencing pain without ever appearing cruel. It's emotional minimization dressed in soft language, control masked as compassion. But once you see the pattern, the sugarcoating dissolves, and you recognize it for what it is, a way to keep you quiet, small, and dependent. Real empathy doesn't silence, it empowers, and real sympathy doesn't dismiss. It validates, respects, and uplifts. Manufactured competition. Competition can be healthy when it's fair, transparent, and used to motivate growth. But when competition is manipulated, it becomes toxic. Manufactured competition is a tactic where a manipulator deliberately pits people against one another, friends, siblings, co-workers, or partners, in order to maintain control, keep everyone insecure, and position themselves as the one who decides who wins. Unlike natural competition, which arises from real differences or goals, manufactured competition is engineered, artificial, and designed to destabilize relationships. This tactic often begins with comparisons. A manipulative parent might say, "Why can't you be more like your brother? He always gets top grades." A partner might remark, "My ex never had a problem with this. Why do you?" A boss might pit employees against each other by praising one while subtly undermining the other. "I wish more people worked like Alex. Maybe then we'd get things done on time." In each case, the manipulator creates a rivalry where there doesn't need to be one, fostering jealousy, resentment, and insecurity. In romantic relationships, manufactured competition is particularly cruel. A toxic partner may casually bring up how attractive someone else is, or highlight how a past partner never complained the way you do. At first, you might brush it off as an offhand comment, but repeated comparisons chip away at your self-esteem. Instead of feeling secure in the relationship, you feel like you're constantly being measured against others. The manipulator thrives on this insecurity because as long as you're competing for their approval, you're less likely to challenge their behavior. Families are breeding grounds for manufactured competition. Parents or caregivers may set siblings against one another with constant comparisons. Who's smarter? Who's more obedient? Who's more successful? The children grow up seeing each other as rivals instead of allies, weakening family bonds and ensuring that the parent remains the central authority. Even in adulthood, these patterns linger. Siblings may continue to feel judged against one another, unable to shake the belief that love and acceptance are limited resources to be fought over. In workplaces, manufactured competition shows up in the form of favoritism and scarcity. A boss might praise one employee while criticizing another in front of the team, creating a hierarchy of favorites. They may assign impossible goals and then compare employees' performances, fostering resentment instead of collaboration. This environment breeds mistrust, making it harder for colleagues to support one another. The manipulator benefits from the chaos, because as long as everyone is competing, no one unites to challenge their leadership. The psychological impact of manufactured competition is profound. At its core, it creates a scarcity mindset. You begin to believe that approval, love, or success is limited, and that you must fight others to earn your share. This erodes trust in relationships, making it hard to form authentic connections. You might view friends, siblings, or co-workers not as allies, but as rivals. The manipulator, meanwhile, sits comfortably in the role of referee, the one who controls the prize. Another layer of cruelty is how this tactic distorts self-worth. Instead of valuing yourself for who you are, you measure yourself against whoever the manipulator is holding up as the standard. You may start chasing unrealistic expectations, bending over backwards to prove yourself, or tearing others down in order to get ahead. The manipulator doesn't care who wins. In fact, they often change the standards so no one ever truly succeeds. The point isn't fairness, it's perpetual competition that keeps everyone insecure and focused on each other instead of the manipulator's behavior. Over time, manufactured competition damages not only self-esteem, but also community. Friendships erode under suspicion, sibling relationships fracture under comparison, teams fall apart under favoritism. The manipulator thrives on this isolation because it keeps you dependent on them for validation. They have turned your natural desire for connection into a weapon against you. Recognizing manufactured competition requires paying attention to the source. Are you truly competing for limited resources, or is someone creating rivalry where none needs to exist? Do you feel like you're constantly compared to others, and does that comparison come from one specific person? Do you notice that your relationships with others weaken whenever this person is involved? These are signs that competition is being manufactured, not organic. The antidote is stepping out of the rigged game. Instead of competing for the manipulator's approval, build solidarity with the very people they're pitting you against. Siblings who realize they're both victims of comparison can support one another. Co-workers who see favoritism for what it is can collaborate instead of compete. Partners who refuse to play the comparison game can reclaim their self-worth. By refusing to fight over the manipulator's crumbs, you take away the power of their setup. At its core, manufactured competition is about divide and conquer. It keeps people isolated, insecure, and distracted, while the manipulator maintains control. But once you recognize that the game was designed to keep you small, you can choose to stop playing. Real love, real family, and real leadership don't pit people against each other. They lift everyone together. Projection of insecurity. Projection is one of the most common defense mechanisms in human psychology. Everyone does it from time to time, blaming others for things they secretly fear about themselves. But in the hands of a manipulator, projection becomes more than just a coping habit. It becomes a weapon. Projection of insecurity is when someone takes their own flaws, fears, or inadequacies and projects them onto you, making you carry the burden of what actually belongs to them. Instead of owning their issues, they force you to feel like you're the one with the problem. Imagine a partner who constantly worries about being unfaithful but never admits it. Instead, they accuse you of cheating. Every time you come home late, they interrogate you. Every time you look at your phone, they peek over your shoulder. Their accusations aren't about your behavior. They're a projection of their own unspoken temptations or insecurities. By projecting onto you, they avoid facing themselves. Worse, they make you feel guilty for something you never did. In families, projection of insecurity often comes from parents. A parent who struggled with academics might constantly criticize their child's school performance. Not because the child is failing, but because the parent can't face their own sense of inadequacy. A parent insecure about their looks might mock or over-control their child's appearance. Instead of resolving their insecurities, they dump them onto their child, forcing the next generation to carry emotional baggage that never belonged to them. Workplaces also teem with projection. A boss insecure about their leadership skills may accuse employees of being disorganized or unmotivated, even when the real issue is their poor management. A coworker insecure about missing deadlines may constantly complain that you are unreliable. By projecting, they shift attention away from their own weaknesses and place you on the defensive. Suddenly, you're spending energy proving your competence while their flaws remain hidden. The cruelty of projection of insecurity lies in how convincing it can feel. Because the accusations often come from people close to us, we're inclined to take them seriously. If your partner insists you're too needy, you may begin questioning yourself, even if your needs are perfectly reasonable. If your boss calls you lazy, you may overwork to prove them wrong, even if you're already carrying more than your share. The projection becomes a mirror, warped and distorted, that makes you doubt your own reflection. Psychologically, projection works because it shifts the emotional weight. Insecurity is heavy, uncomfortable, and destabilizing. The manipulator doesn't want to carry it, so they offload it onto you. Once you're defending yourself, they feel lighter. Their problem didn't disappear, it just became yours. And as long as you're distracted by proving yourself, they never have to confront the truth. Another layer of damage comes from how projection erodes self-trust. After enough accusations, you may start to internalize the manipulator's version of reality. You think, maybe I really am too sensitive, too lazy, too selfish. Their insecurities become your self-image. Over time, this wears down your confidence and makes you more dependent on them for validation. Ironically, you end up looking to the very person who projected the insecurity in the first place to tell you that you're good enough. Projection also serves as a shield for the manipulator. By accusing you of their flaws, they disarm criticism before it can even reach them. If they're insecure about lying, they accuse you of dishonesty first. If they're insecure about being controlling, they insist you're the controlling one. This preemptive strike keeps you on the defensive and prevents you from turning the spotlight back where it belongs. Recognizing projection of insecurity requires asking a critical question. Whose voice is this really? When someone accuses you of being selfish, needy, lazy, or disloyal, pause and reflect. Is this accusation consistent with your values and behavior, or does it align more closely with their own actions, fears, or patterns? Often the very thing they accuse you of is the thing they fear in themselves. The antidote to projection is clarity and separation. You don't have to accept every accusation thrown at you. You can calmly respond, "That doesn't align with who I am," or "I think that's more about how you're feeling than about me." This response takes practice because projection is designed to make you feel guilty and defensive. But the more you separate what belongs to you from what belongs to them, the less power their projection has. At its core, projection of insecurity is about refusing to carry what isn't yours. It's about recognizing that when someone points at you with harsh accusations, 3 fingers often point back at them. Their words may sound like truth, but in reality, they are a reflection of their inner battles. By refusing to internalize their insecurities, you reclaim your sense of self and leave them to face the mirror they've been trying to avoid. Mirroring values. Mirroring is a natural part of human bonding. When we meet someone new, we often reflect their tone, body language, or interests to build rapport. Done authentically, mirroring creates trust and intimacy. But in the hands of a manipulator, mirroring becomes a calculated tool of deception. Mirroring values is when someone pretends to share your deepest beliefs, principles, and life goals, not because they truly do, but because it makes you easier to manipulate, trust, and eventually control. At the start, mirroring values feels intoxicating. Imagine meeting someone who seems to align perfectly with everything you care about. If you value honesty, they claim it's their #1 principle. If family means everything to you, they insist family is their top priority too. If you are passionate about social justice, spirituality, fitness, or financial growth, they enthusiastically echo the same values. It feels like destiny. You've found someone who gets you. But beneath the surface, this alignment is an illusion. Manipulators use mirroring values to gain rapid trust. They know that people lower their guard around those who think the same way. By reflecting your values back at you, they bypass your skepticism. You don't feel like you're meeting a stranger. You feel like you're meeting a soulmate, a partner in purpose, or the ally you've always wanted. This instant connection isn't organic. It's engineered. In romantic relationships, mirroring values often shows up during the love bombing phase. A partner might echo every dream you share. You want kids? So do I. You care about honesty? That's the most important thing to me, too. You want to travel and build a life full of adventure? That's exactly what I've always dreamed of. For weeks or months, they present themselves as your perfect match. But over time, cracks appear. Their actions don't align with the values they claimed. The person who swore honesty was everything now lies easily. The person who promised loyalty flirts with others. The mirroring wasn't truth, it was bait. In friendships, mirroring values creates fast but shallow connections. A manipulative friend might copy your hobbies, adopt your moral stances, or echo your worldview. You feel flattered, even validated. But soon, you realize their shared values vanish whenever they're inconvenient. They might loudly echo your belief in kindness, but act cruel behind closed doors. They might claim to share your integrity, but betray you when it benefits them. The mirroring was never about shared principles. It was about access. Workplaces are also fertile ground for this tactic. A boss or coworker might claim to share your vision or professional values to win your trust. We both care about fairness and teamwork, right? They say. But when conflict arises, they abandon those values, leaving you exposed. By the time you realize the alignment was false, you may have already confided in them, trusted them with responsibilities, or relied on them for support. The psychological power of mirroring values lies in how deeply it reaches. It doesn't just echo surface interests like music or hobbies. It targets your identity. When someone reflects back your core values, it feels profoundly affirming. You believe you found someone safe, someone trustworthy, someone aligned with your inner compass. This deep connection makes it harder to see through the manipulation, because questioning them feels like questioning your own beliefs. Another layer of harm comes from the betrayal that follows. When you eventually realize that their actions don't match their words, the pain is doubled. It's not just that they lied, it's that they faked alignment with the very principles that define you. This kind of betrayal cuts to the core, making you question not only them, but yourself. How could I have fallen for this? Am I too trusting? The manipulator counts on this self-doubt because it keeps you focused on your perceived failure instead of their calculated deceit. Over time, repeated exposure to value mirroring can make you cynical. You may start to mistrust genuine connections, suspecting everyone who agrees with you of manipulation. This erosion of trust isolates you, making it harder to build authentic relationships. The manipulator's game leaves scars that linger long after they're gone. Recognizing mirroring values requires patience and discernment. Real values are consistent, and revealed through action, not just words. If someone's values seem too perfectly aligned with yours, step back and observe. Do their behaviors match their claims, even when it costs them? Do they uphold the values they echo when it's inconvenient? Do they practice what they preach over time, not just in the beginning? If not, you may be dealing with a manipulator using mirroring as a mask. The antidote is time and consistency. Trust isn't built on words, it's built on repeated alignment between values and actions. Healthy people may share some of your values, but they won't need to mirror all of them to prove worthiness. Manipulators, on the other hand, often mirror excessively, creating a too-perfect reflection. Once you see the over-alignment, you can start questioning, is this real resonance or a strategy to gain access to me? At its core, mirroring values is about hijacking trust at the deepest level. It's the manipulator's saying, I am you, not because it's true, but because it lowers your defenses. But once you recognize that authentic alignment reveals itself over time, not instantly, you can stop falling for the mirror and start waiting for the real reflection, consistent, genuine action that matches the words. Strategic forgetfulness. Forgetting is part of being human. Everyone occasionally overlooks a detail, misses an appointment, or forgets something said in conversation. But manipulators often use forgetfulness as a deliberate strategy. Strategic forgetfulness is when someone pretends to forget commitments, promises, or harmful actions. Not because their memory failed, but because denying the past benefits them. By selectively forgetting, they dodge accountability, manipulate narratives, and shift responsibility back onto you. At first, strategic forgetfulness may look like simple absent-mindedness. A partner who promised to pick up groceries shrugs and says, "Oh, sorry, I forgot." A coworker who missed a deadline claims, "It totally slipped my mind." A friend who ignored your important event insists, "Oh, I must have forgotten you mentioned it." On the surface, these seem like harmless lapses, but when the forgetfulness happens over and over, especially around situations where accountability is needed, it's no accident. In relationships, strategic forgetfulness often shows up around boundaries and promises. Suppose you've told your partner, "Please don't share personal details about me with others." The next week, they do exactly that. When confronted, they insist, "I forgot you said that." This feigned amnesia allows them to sidestep responsibility. Instead of admitting they ignored your request, they frame it as an innocent lapse. You're left feeling frustrated, but unable to prove their intent. In families, strategic forgetfulness is especially damaging. A toxic parent may deny or forget hurtful events from the past. If you bring up a painful memory, say verbal abuse or neglect, they might respond, "I don't remember that happening. You must be exaggerating." Their denial isn't about memory, it's about erasing accountability. Over time, this gaslighting can make you question your own recollection, leaving you unsure whether events really happened the way you remember. Workplaces are fertile ground for this tactic. A manipulative coworker might forget to give you critical information, then blame you when things go wrong. A boss might forget promises about raises, promotions, or flexible schedules, conveniently leaving you stuck while they save face. Because memory is hard to prove, strategic forgetfulness gives them plausible deniability. They can't be held accountable for something they don't recall. The psychological power of strategic forgetfulness lies in its ability to destabilize. When someone repeatedly denies remembering, you're forced into a defensive role. You may feel compelled to prove, remind, or over-explain yourself, exhausting your energy while they sit comfortably behind the shield of "I forgot." The more this happens, the less confident you feel in your own memory. You begin to over-document, over-explain, or even doubt your reality. Exactly what the manipulator wants. Another cruel aspect of this tactic is how it weaponizes forgiveness. When someone insists they forgot, they subtly push you toward excusing them. After all, who hasn't genuinely forgotten something? You may feel guilty for holding a grudge against an innocent mistake, but the manipulator's pattern reveals the truth. Their forgetfulness isn't random. It consistently benefits them and disadvantages you. Over time, strategic forgetfulness erodes trust. If promises are always forgotten, you stop believing words. If boundaries are always forgotten, you stop feeling safe. If past harms are always forgotten, you stop feeling validated in your pain. This erosion doesn't just affect the relationship, It affects your sense of stability in all areas of life. You may become hypervigilant, always tracking details to compensate for their forgetfulness. The mental load becomes yours to carry while they remain carefree. Recognizing strategic forgetfulness requires noticing the patterns. Do they consistently forget things that benefit them if ignored? Do they only seem to forget when accountability is required, but remember perfectly when it suits them? Do you feel like the keeper of all promises, boundaries, and details while they remain conveniently blank? These are signs that their forgetfulness is not accidental, it's strategic. The antidote is documentation and boundaries. Keep records of agreements, promises, and boundaries, texts, emails, written notes. When they claim to forget, you can point to the record. But, more importantly, stop allowing forgetfulness to erase accountability. Respond calmly. You may not remember, but this was agreed on, and I expect it to be respected. This reframes the issue. Memory may fail, but responsibility does not. At its core, strategic forgetfulness is about erasing the past when the past is inconvenient. It's a manipulation of memory to protect the manipulator and burden the victim. But once you recognize the pattern, you stop confusing it with genuine forgetfulness. You realize it's not about memory, it's about control. And you reclaim the truth. Accountability doesn't depend on perfect recall. It depends on integrity, respect, and the willingness to own one's actions. Whisper campaigns. Whispers are powerful. They travel quietly, multiply quickly, and reach places you never imagined. Unlike open confrontation, which you can see and respond to, whispers are invisible weapons. Whisper campaigns are manipulative tactics where someone spreads rumors, insinuations, or half-truths behind your back to damage your reputation, erode your relationships, and isolate you socially. It's not just gossip. It's a calculated form of character assassination designed to control how others see you. Whisper campaigns often begin subtly. A manipulator might drop small, seemingly innocent comments about you. I'm worried about them. They seem really unstable lately. Or, I don't want to say too much, but you should probably be careful around them. These comments aren't direct accusations. They're seeds. Once planted, they grow in the minds of others, shaping perceptions without the manipulator ever needing to provide evidence. In relationships, whisper campaigns often target your support network. A toxic partner might quietly tell your friends or family, I love them, but you know how dramatic they can get. Or, I'm really concerned about how controlling they've been. Over time, your loved ones begin to doubt your perspective, primed to see you through the manipulator's lens. When conflict eventually arises, they're more likely to side with the manipulator because the groundwork has already been laid. In families, whisper campaigns can pit relatives against one another. A parent might speak negatively about one child to the others. Your sister thinks she's better than everyone else, or your brother isn't as responsible as he seems. These whispered judgments create divisions, fostering mistrust and resentment. The family fractures while the manipulator strengthens their position as the central figure everyone turns to. Workplaces are notorious for whisper campaigns. A coworker who feels threatened by your success may quietly tell others, I heard they're not as competent as they look, or be careful, management isn't happy with them. A manipulative boss might frame you as difficult behind closed doors, ensuring that promotions pass you by and colleagues avoid aligning with you. By the time you notice the shift in how people treat you, the whisper campaign has already reshaped your professional reputation. The cruelty of whisper campaigns lies in their invisibility. Because the manipulator works behind the scenes, you rarely know when or where the rumors began. You just notice people pulling away, treating you differently, or doubting your words. When you try to defend yourself, it often backfires. If you deny the rumors, you risk sounding defensive. If you confront the manipulator, they feign innocence. I never said that. You must be misinformed. The whispers are untraceable, and that's exactly what makes them so effective. Psychologically, whisper campaigns are devastating because they attack one of our deepest needs, the need to be trusted and believed. Humans are social creatures who rely on reputation and connection. When those are undermined, it creates profound isolation. You may start questioning your worth, doubting your ability to connect, or even withdrawing from others out of fear of further rejection. The manipulator thrives in this isolation. because once you're cut off from support, you're easier to control. Another layer of harm is the way whisper campaigns distort reality. People who hear the rumors may unconsciously adjust their behavior toward you, being colder, more distant, or less trusting without ever voicing why. You're left confused, sensing a shift you can't explain. This ambiguity is intentional. The manipulator's whispers work best when they create silent wedges, subtle enough that you doubt yourself but strong enough to damage your connections. Over time, whisper campaigns can destroy reputations entirely. In personal relationships, they can end friendships or marriages. In families, they can cause lifelong estrangement. In workplaces, they can derail careers. And because the manipulator often maintains a charming, trustworthy public image, others rarely suspect them as the source. They walk away looking innocent, even sympathetic, while you bear the weight of suspicion and isolation. Recognizing whisper campaigns requires paying attention to patterns. Do multiple people suddenly treat you differently without clear explanation? Do you hear vague concerns about your behavior that don't match your reality? Do you notice that one person seems consistently involved in conversations about you, always framing themselves as concerned or supportive? These are signs that whispers may be at work. The antidote to whisper campaigns is visibility and truth. Document your actions, clarify your intentions, and build relationships rooted in transparency. When possible, address issues openly. I've heard there are concerns about me. I'd like to clear them up directly. While you can't always stop whispers, you can refuse to play the game of secrecy. Healthy people will appreciate your openness, while manipulators will resist it, revealing themselves in the process. At its core, whisper campaigns are about control through invisibility. They allow manipulators to shape reality from the shadows, damaging your reputation while preserving theirs. But once you shine light on the whispers, through awareness, documentation, and direct communication, you strip the tactic of its power, because truth spoken aloud has a strength that whispers never can. Poison praise. Praise is supposed to uplift. It's meant to celebrate effort, affirm worth, and build confidence. But manipulators can twist even praise into a weapon. Poison praise is when compliments are delivered with a hidden sting, praise laced with comparison, condescension, or subtle criticism. On the surface, it looks like kindness. Underneath, it leaves you feeling small, insecure, or indebted. At first, poison praise sounds flattering. A friend might say, "Wow, you look great today for once." A parent might beam, "I'm so proud you finally did something right." A boss might remark, "That presentation was surprisingly good." Each statement contains a compliment, but it's poisoned with an undercurrent of insult or doubt. Instead of feeling empowered, you feel unsettled, unsure whether you've been lifted up or quietly cut down. In relationships, poison praise often appears in comparisons. A partner might say, "You look almost as good as my ex in that outfit," or "You're smarter than most of the people I've dated." The words sound complimentary, but the comparisons sting. They position you not as valued in your own right, but as better or worse relative to someone else. This keeps you insecure, always striving to prove your worth against invisible rivals. In families, poison praise is a long-standing tactic. A parent might say, "You're definitely the artistic one in the family, not like your brother, who actually has a real career," or, "I'm glad you're finally losing weight. I was worried you would always struggle." These backhanded compliments disguise criticism as approval. The child is left chasing approval that feels conditional, always tied to the parent's underlying disapproval. Workplaces are riddled with poison praise. A boss might tell an employee, "This is the first project you've done where I don't have to fix everything," or, "You're not as bad at this as I thought you'd be." The praise looks like recognition, but it's framed in a way that undermines confidence. Instead of feeling valued, the employee feels diminished, constantly reminded of their supposed inadequacy. The psychological harm of poison praise is subtle but corrosive. Because the words contain praise, your brain initially registers a positive hit. Compliments trigger dopamine, making you feel momentarily validated. But the poison embedded in the statement quickly takes over, creating self-doubt, insecurity, and confusion. This emotional whiplash is disorienting. You don't know whether to feel proud or ashamed. That's exactly the manipulator's goal, to keep you off balance. Another cruel aspect of poison praise is how it conditions you to accept crumbs of approval. Because the praise is rare and backhanded, you cling to it even when it hurts. You think, at least they noticed me. Over time, you become addicted to their poisoned compliments, because even negative validation feels better than nothing. This dynamic keeps you trapped, striving for praise that will never truly affirm you. Poison praise also serves as a form of control. By giving with one hand and taking with the other, manipulators establish themselves as the authority on your worth. You can never rest in confidence, because their compliments always come with conditions. You're constantly measuring yourself against their shifting standards, hoping one day the praise will be pure. But for manipulators, it never is, because the poison is the point. Recognizing poison praise requires tuning into how compliments make you feel. Genuine praise leaves you lighter, more confident, and more secure. Poison praise leaves you conflicted, anxious, or diminished. If you find yourself second-guessing whether a compliment was really kind, it probably wasn't. The discomfort you feel is your intuition noticing the sting beneath the sugar. The antidote to poison praise is separating the praise from the poison. You can acknowledge the positive without internalizing the negative. For example, if someone says, "That was surprisingly good," you can mentally discard the surprisingly and own the truth. Your work was good. By refusing to ingest the poison, you reclaim the power of the praise. Over time, you also learn to demand healthier forms of validation and distance yourself from those who can't offer them. At its core, poison praise is about destabilizing confidence under the guise of kindness. It's a reminder that not all compliments are gifts, some are traps. But once you learn to recognize the difference, you stop letting backhanded flattery define your worth. Real praise uplifts without conditions. Real kindness doesn't sting. And once you commit to only accepting praise that nourishes, you free yourself from the manipulator's poisoned cup. Identity erosion. Identity is the core of who we are, our values, beliefs, interests, boundaries, and sense of self. A healthy relationship, whether romantic, familial, or professional, supports and strengthens that identity. But manipulators often aim for the opposite. Identity erosion is the slow, deliberate process of wearing down who you are until you become easier to control. It doesn't happen in one dramatic blow. Instead, it happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, like waves grinding down stone. By the time you realize what's gone, pieces of yourself may already feel lost. Identity erosion begins subtly. A partner might tease you about your hobbies. Do you really need to spend so much time on that? It's kind of silly. A friend might question your beliefs. You actually think that? I thought you were smarter. A parent might dismiss your boundaries. Don't be ridiculous, that's not who you are. Each comment feels small, but over time, they chip away at your confidence in your own identity. In romantic relationships, this erosion can be profound. At the start, the manipulator often mirrors your values and encourages your individuality. But as the relationship deepens, the erosion begins. They criticize your style, your career choices, your friendships. They make you feel guilty for liking the things you like, or imply that your interests are childish or unattractive. Slowly, you give up hobbies, distance yourself from friends, and reshape yourself to fit their preferences. Eventually, you may look in the mirror and realize you no longer recognize the person staring back. In families, identity erosion often begins in childhood. Parents who ridicule or dismiss their children's natural traits, sensitivity, creativity, independence, send the message, who you are isn't good enough. A child who loves art may be told to do something practical. A child who values quiet may be forced into constant activity. Over time, the child learns to suppress their authentic self to gain approval. As adults, they may struggle to even know who they are, because their identity was eroded before it had a chance to form. Workplaces can also erode identity. A manipulative boss may pressure employees to adopt company values at the expense of personal ones. They might reward conformity while punishing individuality, subtly encouraging people to sacrifice their authenticity for the sake of fitting in. Over time, employees stop voicing their real opinions, stop expressing their creativity, and become shells of themselves, easier to control and less likely to challenge authority. The psychological impact of identity erosion is devastating. When your sense of self is constantly undermined, you begin to doubt your own preferences, feelings, and instincts. You may start asking others for validation before making even small decisions. You may feel lost, disconnected, or like you're living someone else's life. This disorientation makes you more dependent on the manipulator, because without a strong identity, you lean on them to tell you who you are. Another cruel aspect of identity erosion is its invisibility. Because it happens slowly, you rarely notice the full scope until much later. It's death by 1,000 cuts. A criticism here, a dismissal there, a subtle discouragement layered on top of another. By the time you realize how much of yourself you've lost, reclaiming your identity feels overwhelming. That's exactly what the manipulator counts on, that you'll be too worn down to rebuild. Identity erosion also serves as a way to rewrite history. Manipulators may tell you, you've always been like this, even when you know you haven't. They may insist that changes they forced on you were your own choices. Over time, you may begin to forget who you were before the manipulation. This blurring of past and present makes it harder to break free, because you can't easily point to the version of yourself that existed before the erosion began. Recognizing identity erosion requires pausing to ask difficult questions. Do I feel more or less like myself in this relationship? Have I given up things I once loved just to avoid conflict? Do I second-guess my preferences, opinions, or boundaries more than I used to? If the answer is yes, you may be caught in the slow grind of identity erosion. The antidote is reclamation. Rebuilding identity begins with small acts of self-connection, revisiting hobbies you abandoned, spending time with people who affirm you, making choices based on your preferences rather than someone else's approval. It also requires setting boundaries, refusing to let others define who you are or dismiss what matters to you. The process can be slow, but each step reclaims a piece of the self that was chipped away. At its core, identity erosion is about control through diminishment. The manipulator knows that a strong, confident person is harder to control, so they chip away at your identity until you are easier to mold. But your identity is not gone. It's buried beneath the erosion. And once you recognize what's happening, you can begin the work of excavation, reclaiming the authentic self that was always there, waiting to rise again. Emotional breadcrumbing, relationships thrive on consistency, investment, and reciprocity. But manipulators often withhold these essentials and offer only crumbs, just enough to keep you hooked, but never enough to truly satisfy you. Emotional breadcrumbing is when someone doles out tiny fragments of attention, affection, or validation at irregular intervals, keeping you chasing more while ensuring you never receive the full nourishment of real connection. It's like being starved and then handed scraps. You cling to the crumbs, hoping for a meal that never comes. Breadcrumbing can appear in many contexts. In romantic relationships, it often looks like inconsistent communication. A partner may disappear for days, then send a sweet message out of nowhere, thinking of you. Or they cancel plans repeatedly, but then suddenly shower you with affection, just enough to keep hope alive. You never know when the next crumb will arrive, so you wait, anxious and eager, clinging to every morsel. In friendships, breadcrumbing may look like someone who only reaches out when they need something, sprinkling in just enough warmth to keep you around. They may say things like, "We should hang out soon," but never follow through. Or they send the occasional nostalgic message, just enough to remind you of the bond, but their actions never match their words. You're kept dangling, invested in a connection that isn't truly reciprocal. In workplaces, breadcrumbing shows up as vague promises. A boss may hint at promotions, raises, or opportunities without ever delivering. You're definitely on our radar for bigger things. Just keep working hard. The praise feels like a crumb of validation, enough to keep you motivated, but the real reward never arrives. You stay trapped in a cycle of waiting, working harder for the promise of something that may never materialize. The psychological power of breadcrumbing lies in its unpredictability. Like intermittent reinforcement, it creates a cycle of hope and disappointment. Your brain latches on to the crumbs, magnifying their importance. A single compliment feels monumental. A brief moment of attention feels like proof that things are improving. You begin to cling to the rare positives, ignoring the long stretches of neglect. Over time, this conditioning traps you in a loop of chasing crumbs instead of demanding the full nourishment you deserve. Another cruel aspect of breadcrumbing is how it fuels self-doubt. Because the crumbs arrive inconsistently, you may wonder if the lack of more is your fault. Maybe if I were more patient, more attractive, more successful, they'd give me more. You start working harder, bending further, accepting less, all in the hope of earning a full meal that will never come. The manipulator doesn't need to invest much. They just need to keep tossing crumbs. Breadcrumbing also serves as a form of control. By keeping you perpetually hungry, the manipulator ensures your focus stays on them. You're too busy analyzing crumbs, decoding texts, replaying conversations, dissecting minor gestures, to notice the bigger picture. They're not truly investing in you. This fixation keeps you distracted, loyal, and unlikely to walk away, even as your needs go unmet. Over time, emotional breadcrumbing erodes self-worth. You may forget what a real, consistent connection feels like. You normalize scarcity, convincing yourself that crumbs are better than nothing. This scarcity mindset can bleed into other areas of life, making you more likely to accept less in friendships, jobs, or opportunities. The longer you stay breadcrumbed, the more malnourished your emotional life becomes. Recognizing breadcrumbing requires stepping back from the crumbs to look at the whole pattern. Do their actions match their words? Do they show up consistently, or only when it benefits them? Do you feel fulfilled in the relationship, or perpetually hungry and waiting? If you find yourself clinging to rare scraps of affection or vague promises, you may be caught in breadcrumbing. The antidote is self-nourishment and boundaries. Instead of waiting for crumbs, ask yourself, am I being offered a real meal? If the answer is no, you can choose to step away. This doesn't mean shutting down at the first inconsistency. Everyone has busy moments, but it does mean refusing to accept chronic scarcity. Healthy connections are consistent, reciprocal, and sustaining. They don't keep you starving for attention. They feed you regularly, with care and reliability. At its core, emotional breadcrumbing is about control through deprivation. The manipulator knows they don't need to give much, just enough to keep you invested. But once you realize crumbs aren't proof of love, they're proof of manipulation, you can stop waiting at their table. You can stand up, walk away, and seek the nourishment of relationships where you're not starved, but fed, fully, consistently, and with respect. Faux empathy. Empathy is one of the most powerful forces in human connection. It allows us to feel with others, to validate their experiences, and to build bonds rooted in compassion and trust. But manipulators often weaponize empathy, turning it into a mask. Faux empathy is when someone pretends to understand and care about your feelings, not because they genuinely do, but because it benefits them. Their performance of empathy is calculated, selective, and ultimately self-serving. At first glance, faux empathy looks real. A manipulator might tilt their head, soften their voice, and say, "I can only imagine how hard that must be for you." They might shed tears during a confrontation, or place a hand on your shoulder as if they're sharing your pain. But beneath the display lies a hollowness. Their words don't lead to change. Their comfort doesn't address the harm. Their empathy is a performance designed to keep you calm, compliant, or forgiving. In relationships, faux empathy often appears during conflicts. Suppose you confront a partner about their hurtful behavior. They may nod, sigh, and say, "I totally get it. I know I hurt you, and I feel awful." For a moment, you feel heard, but days later, nothing has changed. They repeat the same behavior, then recycle the same sympathetic words. Their faux empathy was never about growth. It was about placating you long enough to avoid accountability. In families, faux empathy can appear as performative concern. A parent who constantly dismisses your feelings may, when called out, suddenly respond with a dramatic show of care. "Oh, honey, I feel so bad that you think I hurt you." Notice the subtle twist. The focus isn't on your actual pain, but on how they appear. Their sympathy is about protecting their image, not validating your experience. Over time, this pattern conditions you to doubt your own needs because the empathy feels shallow, hollow, and fleeting. Workplaces are full of faux empathy, especially in toxic leadership. A boss may say, "I understand how overwhelmed you are," while simultaneously piling on more tasks. Or during layoffs, management might perform empathy in public speeches. "We know this is difficult, and we truly care about our employees." Yet, behind closed doors, the decisions are purely profit-driven, with no real regard for people's lives. The empathy is a script, not a value. The psychological impact of faux empathy is particularly insidious because it plays with one of our deepest needs, to be seen and understood. When someone pretends to empathize, your brain initially registers relief. You feel validated, even if only for a moment. But when the empathy proves empty, the relief turns to confusion. You wonder, am I asking too much? Did they actually care, or am I imagining it? This confusion destabilizes you, making it harder to trust your perceptions. Another cruel aspect of faux empathy is how it weaponizes vulnerability. Manipulators often use their performance of empathy to extract more from you. They might say, "I completely understand what you're going through," then pivot into asking for your forgiveness, loyalty, or silence. Their empathy isn't for your sake. It's leverage for their own agenda. Over time, you may feel guilty for holding them accountable, because their sympathetic act convinces you they've already suffered enough. Faux empathy also protects the manipulator's image. In public, they may perform empathy to appear kind, compassionate, and trustworthy. People around them, friends, colleagues, even extended family, see the performance and assume it's genuine. When you eventually share your pain, others may doubt you. But they're so caring. I've seen how much they empathize. The performance not only deceives you, but also recruits others into the illusion. Recognizing faux empathy requires looking at consistency. Genuine empathy doesn't just sound good, it leads to action. A truly empathetic partner apologizes and changes their behavior. A genuinely empathetic friend listens and respects your needs. A truly empathetic leader acknowledges struggles and adjusts expectations. If empathy ends at words or gestures without meaningful follow-through, it's likely faux. The antidote to faux empathy is discernment and boundaries. Don't be seduced by words or emotional displays. Watch the patterns. Ask yourself, do their actions align with their empathy? Does their understanding lead to real change? Do I feel cared for or simply pacified? If the answer points to performance, you can choose to disengage from the act and hold firm to your reality. At its core, faux empathy is about control through performance. It's a mask that manipulates your need for connection, tricking you into lowering your defenses. But once you learn to measure empathy not by words, but by actions, the mask falls away. True empathy isn't dramatic or self-serving. It's steady, consistent, and transformative. And once you demand nothing less, manipulators lose one of their most deceptive tools: exploiting vulnerability. Every human being has tender places, wounds from the past, fears about the future, insecurities we try to hide, or struggles we quietly carry. In healthy relationships, those vulnerabilities are treated with care. They become spaces for trust, intimacy, and healing. But in toxic dynamics, manipulators see vulnerability not as something to honor, but as something to exploit. Exploiting vulnerability is when someone takes advantage of your pain, insecurities, or struggles to gain power, control, or personal benefit. This tactic often starts with trust building. Manipulators know that in order to exploit, they must first gain access. They'll encourage you to open up. You can tell me anything. I'll never judge you. They may share their own carefully chosen vulnerabilities to lower your guard, creating a false sense of safety. Once you confide in them about your past trauma, your insecurities, your weaknesses, they file the information away, not to support you, but to use against you later. In romantic relationships, exploitation of vulnerability can be brutal. If you share that you fear abandonment because of childhood neglect, the manipulative partner may weaponize it during fights. No wonder everyone leaves you. You're too much to handle. If you reveal financial struggles, they may use it to trap you. You can't leave me. You couldn't survive without my support. What you shared in good faith becomes ammunition in their arsenal. In families, vulnerability is often exploited under the guise of care. A parent might know a child's fear of failure and constantly manipulate it. You'd never make it without me. You need me to keep you on track. Or a sibling might mock a sensitive trait, like shyness or insecurity, turning it into a running joke that erodes self-esteem. Because families are supposed to be safe, this betrayal cuts especially deep. Key places are also rife with this tactic. A manager who knows an employee is desperate for job stability may exploit that vulnerability to demand unpaid overtime. I know how much you need this job, so I'm counting on you to go above and beyond. A coworker who learns about your anxiety may use it to undermine you subtly. Are you sure you can handle this? I know you get overwhelmed. By highlighting and using your weaknesses, they secure leverage. The psychological harm of exploiting vulnerability is profound. When someone weaponizes the very things you trusted them with, it creates deep shame and self-blame. You may think, I should never have shared that. It's my fault for being weak. This shame silences you, making you less likely to seek support in the future. Over time, you may grow emotionally closed off, convinced that vulnerability is dangerous instead of life-giving. Another cruel layer is how this tactic isolates you. Once your vulnerabilities are exposed, manipulators may spread them to others through gossip or whisper campaigns. Don't tell them too much, you know how insecure they get. Suddenly, you're not only struggling with your pain, you're also fighting the stigma of others knowing. This public exposure makes you retreat further inward, cutting off sources of genuine support and leaving you more dependent on the manipulator. Exploitation of vulnerability also serves as a control mechanism. By keeping you tied to your weaknesses, the manipulator ensures you never feel strong enough to break free. They remind you of your fears whenever you resist. You'll never make it without me. You know you're too sensitive to handle this alone. By pressing on your most tender spots, they keep you compliant, ashamed, and small. Recognizing this tactic requires courage. Ask yourself, when I share my struggles with this person, do they honor and support me, or do they throw it back in my face later? Do I feel safer and stronger after opening up, or do I feel weaker and more controlled? True allies use your vulnerabilities to protect and uplift you. Manipulators use them to tighten their grip. The antidote to exploitation is selective trust and boundary setting. Vulnerability is powerful, but it should only be shared with those who have proven themselves safe through consistent empathy and respect. If someone repeatedly weaponizes your pain, stop giving them access to it. You may not be able to control what they already know, but you can control what you reveal in the future. Reclaiming your story through journaling, therapy, or trusted connections also helps you transform vulnerabilities into strengths, taking away the manipulator's leverage. At its core, exploiting vulnerability is about twisting trust into a trap. It's one of the cruelest manipulations because it weaponizes the very things that make us human. But the truth is, your vulnerabilities are not flaws to be exploited. They are sources of resilience, empathy, and strength. When you reclaim them, manipulators lose their grip. And when you learn to share them only with the safe and trustworthy, you transform vulnerability from a weakness into your greatest shield. Double-bind communication. Communication is meant to bring clarity, resolve tension, and build understanding. But manipulators can turn it into a trap. Double-bind communication is when someone gives you conflicting or contradictory messages. So, no matter what you do, you're wrong. These mixed signals create confusion, self-doubt, and paralysis. You're trapped in a situation where every choice leads to failure, and the manipulator gets to remain in control. A simple example, a parent telling their child, "Be independent, but don't ever disobey me." If the child asserts independence, they're punished for disobedience. If they obey, they're criticized for lacking independence. Both paths lead to criticism, so the child learns that nothing they do will ever be good enough. This confusion doesn't just frustrate them in the moment, it reshapes their entire sense of self. In relationships, double binds are especially cruel. A partner might say, "I want you to be more open with me," but then shame you when you express honest feelings. "Why are you so emotional? You're overreacting." If you share, you're punished. If you stay quiet, you're accused of being distant. Over time, you stop knowing what's safe. You silence yourself, not because you want to, but because you're trapped in an impossible loop. Workplaces are filled with double binds too. A boss might demand, "Take initiative, but don't make decisions without my approval," or "Work faster, but don't sacrifice quality." Employees scramble to meet contradictory demands, only to be criticized regardless of their choice. This isn't about performance. It's about keeping workers anxious, insecure, and dependent on the manipulator's unpredictable approval. The psychological impact of double-bind communication is profound. When you're constantly given contradictory expectations, your brain enters a state of cognitive dissonance. I feel trapped, anxious, and confused. Over time, you stop trusting your own judgment. You may think, "Maybe I really am incompetent. Maybe I just can't get it right." The manipulator's voice becomes internalized, and self-doubt grows into a permanent state of mind. Another layer of harm is the erosion of autonomy. In a double bind, every choice leads to failure, so eventually you stop choosing. You wait for the manipulator to dictate the right move, even though you know it will still end in criticism. This learned helplessness keeps you small, compliant, and easier to control. The manipulator doesn't need to monitor you constantly. You've been conditioned to monitor yourself. Double binds also serve as a shield for the manipulator. Because their messages are contradictory, they can always deny responsibility. If you obey one instruction, they point to the other. I told you not to do that. If you obey the second, they highlight the first. I told you I wanted initiative. This shifting standard means they're never accountable. You're always at fault. Recognizing double-bind communication requires stepping back from the trap. Ask yourself, are the expectations being placed on me contradictory? Does one path cancel out the other? Do I feel like no matter what I do, I'll be wrong? If the answer is yes, you're not dealing with fair communication. You're dealing with a setup. The antidote is refusing to play the impossible game. Instead of scrambling to please, name the contradiction directly. You've asked me to do two things that conflict. Which is your priority? Healthy people will clarify. Manipulators will deflect, because the contradiction was never accidental. It was their tool. Another option is to reclaim your autonomy by choosing what aligns with your values, regardless of their reaction. If you're going to be criticized anyway, you may as well act in alignment with yourself. At its core, double-bind communication is about control through confusion. It traps you in endless loops of self-doubt, ensuring the manipulator always has the upper hand. But once you learn to spot the contradiction, the trap loses its power. You realize the problem was never your inability to get it right. It was their deliberate creation of a no-win scenario. And the moment you step out of the bind, you reclaim the clarity, autonomy, and confidence that were yours all along. Normalization of abuse. Abuse rarely starts at full intensity. If it did, most people would run. Instead, abusers rely on gradual conditioning, slowly teaching their victims to accept mistreatment as normal. Normalization of abuse is the process where harmful behaviors are reframed, minimized, or disguised so thoroughly that the victim begins to tolerate what should never be tolerated. Over time, lines blur, boundaries collapse, and abuse becomes part of daily life, hidden in plain sight. This process usually begins small. A partner may snap at you during an argument and later brush it off. I was just stressed. Everyone fights sometimes. A parent might shame you in front of relatives, then laugh. Don't be so sensitive. It was just a joke. A boss may scream at employees, then justify it. That's just how this industry is. These early incidents plant the seed. Abuse is rebranded as stress, humor, passion, or culture. You're encouraged to believe it's not really abuse at all. As the behavior escalates, the minimization continues. Verbal attacks become tough love. Controlling behavior becomes protection. Physical intimidation becomes just a bad temper. Each time you object, you're told you're overreacting, too sensitive, or misunderstanding. Slowly, you begin to question your judgment. If everyone around you insists it's normal, maybe it really is. In relationships, normalization often shows up as a cycle. Early red flags, jealousy, monitoring, or insults are reframed as signs of love. I only act this way because I care so much. When you resist, the abuser may apologize, shower you with affection, and insist the behavior will never happen again. But when it does, they minimize it further. Soon, the cycle itself becomes normalized. You expect mistreatment, apologies, and temporary calm as part of the pattern of love. In families, normalization begins in childhood. A child growing up with constant yelling, neglect, or manipulation may come to see it as the way all families operate. If every request is met with ridicule, if affection is conditional, if respect is absent, they internalize these conditions as just how life is. As adults, they may unconsciously gravitate toward abusive partners or workplaces because abuse feels familiar, even if it hurts. Workplaces normalize abuse through culture. Toxic managers excuse bullying with lines like, "We push hard here because excellence matters." Coworkers dismiss harassment as just part of the job. Over time, employees adapt by silencing themselves, avoiding confrontation, or laughing off what should have been reported. The abuse doesn't disappear. It becomes embedded in the culture, protected by silence and compliance. The psychological toll of normalization is devastating. Abuse thrives in secrecy and silence, but normalization goes further. It convinces you there's nothing to speak about. You learn to doubt your instincts, suppress your anger, and minimize your pain. You may even defend the abuser to others. They don't mean it that way, or it's not as bad as it sounds. This self-defense mechanism protects your relationship in the short term, but erodes your self-worth over time. Another cruel effect is the way normalization reshapes your threshold for harm. What once would have shocked or enraged you becomes mundane. If raised voices are constant, you stop noticing them. If insults are daily, you learn to shrug them off. This shifting baseline means that when abuse escalates into harsher words, deeper control, or even violence, you may not recognize how far things have deteriorated. Your ability to discern danger is dulled. Normalization also serves the abuser's agenda. By convincing you that mistreatment is ordinary, they absolve themselves of responsibility. If everyone behaves this way, then they're not abusive. They're just human. If all families fight, then your pain isn't special. It's exaggerated. This collective gaslighting makes you feel isolated, ashamed, and less likely to seek help. Recognizing normalization requires comparing your reality to healthier models. Ask yourself, would I accept this behavior if it came from a stranger? Would I want a loved one to tolerate what I'm tolerating? Does this align with my core values of respect and dignity? Often, stepping outside the bubble reveals just how abnormal the normal has become. The antidote to normalization is naming abuse for what it is. This doesn't mean confrontation in every case. It may simply mean reclaiming language in your own mind. That wasn't just a joke. It was humiliation. That wasn't love. It was control. That wasn't passion. It was rage. By naming the truth, you pierce the illusion. From there, you can seek support, set boundaries, or remove yourself from toxic environments. At its core, normalization of abuse is about eroding outrage. It's about turning red flags into white noise, ensuring you no longer resist what you should. But once you awaken to the process, the illusion collapses. Abuse is never normal. It may be common, widespread, even generational, but it is never natural, never acceptable, and never something you deserve. Excessive idealization. At the start of many toxic relationships, everything feels like a dream. The manipulator showers you with affection, admiration, and praise, creating the illusion that you are the most important, most special, most extraordinary person in their world. This stage is intoxicating. It's called excessive idealization, and while it may feel like love at its purest, it is often the opening act of manipulation. The pedestal they put you on isn't built to last. It's designed to control. Excessive idealization is different from genuine admiration. Real love grows steadily, deepening as two people get to know each other. It allows for flaws, respects boundaries, and adapts to reality. Excessive idealization, by contrast, feels rushed, overwhelming, and too good to be true. You're flooded with compliments. You're the smartest person I've ever met. I can't believe someone like you even exists. You're perfect for me in every way. At first, it feels exhilarating, but the intensity is manufactured. It's a performance meant to disarm you. In romantic relationships, this phase is often called love bombing. The manipulator floods you with attention, gifts, and constant communication. They mirror your values, echo your dreams, and insist you're soulmates. You're swept into a whirlwind that feels like destiny. But behind the curtain, this idealization serves a purpose: to lower your defenses quickly. Once you're hooked, once you've invested emotionally, financially, or physically, the pedestal begins to crack. In families, excessive idealization may show up in cycles. A parent who is usually critical may suddenly shower a child with praise. You're the only one I can count on. Or they may place a child on a pedestal compared to siblings. You're the responsible one. The others could never be like you. On the surface, this sounds flattering, but in reality, it too wraps the child in an impossible role, creating guilt, pressure, and division within the family. The praise isn't about love, it's about control. In workplaces, excessive idealization often appears during recruitment or early employment. A boss might gush, "We've never seen talent like yours. You're going to change everything here." Or, "You're the future of this company." At first, you feel valued, But soon, you realize the idealization was bait. The promises of advancement don't materialize. The praise turns to criticism once you're locked into responsibilities. The pedestal was never about genuine appreciation. It was a tool to extract maximum effort. The psychological impact of excessive idealization is powerful. Being idealized triggers dopamine and oxytocin, the brain chemicals associated with reward and bonding. You feel euphoric, bonded, and deeply validated. But because the idealization is unrealistic, it sets you up for an inevitable crash. When the manipulator withdraws affection, criticizes you, or devalues you, the contrast is devastating. You may find yourself working harder to earn back the level of admiration you once received, not realizing it was never real to begin with. Another layer of harm is how excessive idealization distorts self-perception. At first, you may feel flattered, but eventually the impossible pedestal becomes a burden. You feel pressure to maintain the perfect image they've projected onto you. If you show normal human flaws, you fear disappointing them. This pressure keeps you striving, compliant, and self-critical, exactly where the manipulator wants you. Excessive idealization also lays the groundwork for devaluation. In many toxic dynamics, the cycle follows a pattern: idealization, devaluation, discard. After putting you on a pedestal, the manipulator begins to tear you down. They criticize the very traits they once praised. They compare you unfavorably to others. They withdraw affection, leaving you confused. What changed? The answer is, nothing changed. The idealization was never sustainable. It was a tactic to hook you. Recognizing excessive idealization requires slowing down and questioning the intensity. Ask yourself, is this praise proportional to the depth of our relationship? Do their actions align with their words, or is it all performance? Do I feel free to be imperfect, or pressured to live up to an impossible image? If the admiration feels exaggerated, rushed, or conditional, it may be a sign of manipulation rather than genuine love. The antidote is grounding yourself in reality. Healthy love doesn't need to put you on a pedestal. It accepts your humanity, flaws and all. Healthy admiration is steady, consistent, and rooted in truth, not fantasy. When you resist the rush of idealization and insist on pacing, you protect yourself from being swept into a cycle of manipulation. At its core, excessive idealization is about control through flattery. It hooks you with intensity, binds you with validation, and then destabilizes you when the pedestal collapses. But once you recognize that genuine connection doesn't need grandiosity, you stop falling for the performance. You reclaim your right to be fully human. Not perfect, not idealized, but real. Incremental isolation. No one loses all their connections in one day. Isolation, one of the most powerful tools of control, usually happens slowly, almost invisibly. Incremental isolation is the process by which a manipulator gradually separates you from your support systems, friends, family, co-workers, or even your own inner resources. It doesn't happen through outright commands like, "You can never see them again." Instead, it unfolds step by step, through subtle discouragements, engineered conflicts, and emotional manipulation, until one day you look around and realize you're alone. It often begins with small comments. A partner might casually remark, "I don't really like the way your friend talks to you. It seems disrespectful." Or, "Your family doesn't really understand us, do they?" At first, these comments seem protective, even caring. You may not even realize they are seeds being planted. Over time, the comments intensify. "Why do you waste time with them?" "I can't believe you'd choose them over me." Before long, spending time with others feels like a betrayal, and you withdraw, not because you want to, but because you've been conditioned to. In families, incremental isolation can be generational. A parent might subtly pit siblings against each other. "She's the responsible one, not you." Or, "He's the favorite. Why bother trying?" These wedges weaken sibling bonds, leaving the parent as the central figure everyone revolves around. By undermining the natural alliances within the family, the manipulator ensures each child feels more connected to the parent's approval than to one another's support. In workplaces, incremental isolation may look like a boss excluding an employee from important meetings, then later framing it as an oversight. Or coworkers may forget to invite someone to group lunches, slowly pushing them out of the social fabric. Over time, the isola TED employee loses visibility, confidence, and influence, making them easier to undermine or push out entirely. The psychological impact of incremental isolation is devastating because it attacks one of our deepest human needs, belonging. Humans are social creatures wired for connection. When manipulators chip away at your network, they weaken your resilience. Without friends to affirm you, family to support you, or colleagues to back you up, you become more dependent on the manipulator. They transform themselves into your only source of validation, comfort, or reality. Incremental isolation also creates a distorted sense of choice. Because the withdrawal happens step by step, you often feel like you're the one making the decision. I guess I won't call my sister tonight. She probably doesn't get me anymore. Or, maybe I won't bring this problem up with my friends. They wouldn't understand. What feels like your choice is often the product of repeated conditioning, where the manipulator has slowly eroded your trust in others and inflated their own importance. Another cruel layer is how incremental isolation compounds shame. Once you've withdrawn from your support systems, you may feel embarrassed to reach back out. You think, they'll wonder why I disappeared. They'll be mad I chose my partner over them. This shame keeps you from rebuilding connections, locking you deeper into the manipulator's control. Over time, incremental isolation can reshape your worldview. If the only voice you hear is the manipulator's, their reality becomes your reality. You stop questioning because there's no one left to offer perspective. This creates fertile ground for further abuse, because without external mirrors, you lose sight of your own truth. Recognizing incremental isolation requires vigilance. Ask yourself, do I spend less time with people I once loved? And if so, why? Do I feel guilty, anxious, or disloyal when I reach out to others? Has someone in my life framed themselves as the only one who truly understands me? If the answer is yes, you may be caught in the slow grind of incremental isolation. The antidote is rebuilding connections, even in small steps. Reach out to trusted friends or family, even if it feels awkward at first. Seek support groups, communities, or therapy where you can find fresh perspectives. Above all, remind yourself, healthy relationships encourage connection, not restrict it. Love doesn't isolate, it expands. At its core, incremental isolation is about control through loneliness. It's not the dramatic locking of doors or cutting of ties. It's the slow erosion of your support until the manipulator is the only one left. But once you name the process, you reclaim the power to rebuild. You can open the doors they quietly closed, reconnect with the voices they silenced, and remind yourself that true strength isn't found in isolation. It's found in connection. Reputation smearing. Our reputation is one of the most valuable things we possess. It shapes how others perceive us, whether they trust us, and how much influence we hold in our communities, workplaces, and relationships. Manipulators know this, and that's why they target it. Reputation smearing is the deliberate act of spreading lies, distortions, or half-truths to damage someone's credibility and isolate them from support. It's character assassination, not always loud or dramatic, but slow, insidious, and often devastating. Smearing often begins in whispers. A manipulator may casually tell a friend, "I don't want to say too much, but you should keep an eye on them. They can be a little unstable." Or at work, a colleague might quietly suggest, "I've noticed they're not really pulling their weight." These seeds of doubt seem harmless at first, but once planted, they grow in the minds of others. Soon, people start treating you differently, not based on truth, but based on the manipulator's narrative. In relationships, smearing often happens during or after breakups. A toxic ex might tell mutual friends they were abusive, or they're not who you think they are. Even if untrue, the smear taints how others view you. Friends withdraw, siding with the manipulator, leaving you isolated just when you need support most. The manipulator wins twice. They damage your reputation and ensure you stand alone. In families, reputation smearing can be used to maintain control. A parent might label one child as the problem child, constantly telling relatives they have always been so difficult. Even if the child succeeds later in life, the family may continue to view them through the distorted lens of the smear. The label sticks, often for years, undermining their credibility and damaging their sense of self. Workplaces are notorious for reputation smearing. A manipulative boss may undermine an employee's credibility by hinting at incompetence. They mean well, but they're not leadership material. Or a coworker threatened by your success may spread rumors that you're dishonest or disloyal. By the time you try to defend yourself, the narrative has already taken root. Even without evidence, the suspicion lingers, damaging your career trajectory. The psychological impact of reputation smearing is profound because it strikes at identity and belonging. Humans rely on social trust. When that trust is undermined, you're left questioning not only how others see you, but how you see yourself. If enough people believe the smear, you may start to internalize it. Maybe I really am difficult. Maybe I really am unreliable. This erosion of self-confidence compounds the isolation, making it harder to fight back. Another cruel layer is how smearing flips the script. Manipulators often accuse their targets of the very behaviors they themselves engage in. A dishonest person calls you a liar. A controlling person insists you're manipulative. By projecting their flaws onto you publicly, they redirect suspicion and protect their own image. This projection makes it even harder to defend yourself, because the smear feels believable when framed by someone skilled at storytelling. Smearing also recruits enablers. Once the manipulator plants the seeds, others may spread the narrative further, not out of malice, but out of curiosity, fear, or misplaced loyalty. Suddenly, the smear has legs. It circulates without the manipulator even lifting a finger. You're not just fighting one person's lies, you're fighting a network of distorted perceptions. Recognizing reputation smearing requires paying attention to shifts in how others treat you. Do people seem distant without explanation? Do you hear vague rumors about yourself that don't match reality? Do you notice one person at the center of conversations about you, always framed as concerned? These are red flags that your reputation may be under attack. The antidote is truth and transparency, though it takes strategy. Confronting the manipulator directly often backfires. They'll deny, deflect, or use your confrontation as further evidence of your instability. Instead, focus on maintaining integrity and consistency. Document interactions, speak directly to trusted allies, and calmly correct misinformation when it arises. I've heard that's being said, but it isn't true. Here are the facts. Over time, truth paired with consistent action can outlast lies. At its core, reputation smearing is about control through distortion. The manipulator knows they can't always control your actions, but they can control how others perceive you. By rewriting your story in the eyes of others, they weaken your support and strengthen their power. But once you recognize the tactic, you can resist the trap. By refusing to internalize the smear, by building resilience through truth, and by remembering that your reputation is not defined by lies, it's defined by your consistent reality.